Chapter 1428. The second floor of the shop looked a little empty, but there were some scrolls on the walls and some spirit herbs everywhere. These decorations seemed to have taken a lot of effort. Although Xiaohua didn't understand, he could still see a trace of elegance. It was much more comfortable than the first floor that was purely selling things. After the shop assistant served some spirit fruits, he asked Xiaohua and Shui to sit on the few chairs on the second floor. He went straight up the stairs to the third floor. Xiaohua picked up a spirit fruit and put it in his mouth. He gently bit into it, and a juice full of the taste of wine flowed down his throat. Then, a kind of drunken feeling rushed into his mind. Xiaohua had never liked the taste of wine, and even more so, the feeling of drunkenness. He didn't expect this spirit fruit to be like this. He couldn't help but frown. He immediately mobilized his true qi, wanting to expel this disgusting feeling. Shui looked at him with interest. She also took this kind of spirit fruit, but she didn't put it in her mouth. Seeing Xiaohua frown and a trace of redness on his face, she said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, this is a heart intoxication fruit. It's the favorite of male cultivators. Fellow Taoist shouldn't use true qi to regulate his breathing. Otherwise, the feeling of drunkenness will be greatly reduced." The feeling of drunkenness. Xiaohua felt waves of faint in his mind. He bitterly smiled in his heart and said, "This feeling. What's so good about it?" However, this dizziness was also very light. It didn't seem to affect the circulation of true qi in Xiaohua's mind, and it wouldn't put him in a dangerous situation. A moment later, the dizziness suddenly disappeared, and an unprecedented comfort came from his brain. That comfort was like a tide that flowed down from the top of his head and quickly spread throughout his body. An instinctive groan came out from Xiaohua's mouth. As soon as this sound came out, Xiaohua felt that something was wrong. But then, another seductive sound came from Shui's mouth. Shui's eyes were slightly closed, and her face was flushed. Her cherry-red lips were also slightly closed. She was obviously enjoying it. There's no mistake. When Xiaohua saw this, his little heart couldn't help but slightly jump. Even his mouth was a little dry. He smacked his lips and swallowed a mouthful of saliva. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, how do you feel?" Shui opened her somewhat blurred eyes. Her voice carried a moan as she asked faintly, "Very, very good." Xiaohua trembled and hurriedly replied, "Fellow Taoist, you don't want to enjoy another one?" Shui asked again. Xiaohua was in a slightly sorry state. His conditioned reflex was to wave his hand, but just as he raised his hand, he saw a trace of craftiness in Shui's eyes. His heart stirred. He stretched out his hand, picked up a heart intoxication fruit, and said with a smile, "I am risking my life to accompany a beauty. If fellow Taoist Shui wants to eat, then I will also eat one." "Beauty? Hee." Shui's eyes regained their clarity. She covered her mouth and laughed. "No one has called me that for many years. Fellow Taoist Xiao is truly different from the rest." "Really? I feel that it is precisely because fellow Taoist Shui is different that I am different." Xiaohua looked at the heart intoxication fruit in his hand and said with a smile, "Ha ha ha." Shui laughed very straightforwardly and said, "Eating one heart intoxication fruit every day is the most suitable. If you eat too many, it will be detrimental to your Tao heart. I won't eat it. Fellow Taoist Xiao also doesn't need to risk his life." "Hee. Thank you for your reminder, fellow Taoist Shui." Xiaohua smiled and also put the heart intoxication fruit into the jade plate. "Fellow Taoists, I've been waiting for a long time." At this moment, a somewhat aged voice came from the stairs. An old man about 50 years old, about the 10th level of qi refinement, walked down the stairs and cupped his hands in greeting. Xiaohua and Shui both stood up. Shui returned the greeting and said, "Greetings, shopkeeper Liu. I came to this store several times, but I didn't see your figure." "Hee. I am indebted to fellow Taoist Shui. I's body can't compare to fellow Taoists, but it's still all right. These past few days, there were some unforeseen events in the sect, so I left for a period of time." Shopkeeper Liu replied with a smile and turned to look at Xiaohua. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, thank you for patronizing my store. Could it be that your sect had a big unforeseen event? Otherwise, how could Shopkeeper Liu be gone for so long?" Shue Shue asked casually. Hee, it's nothing much. It's just that one of the sect's alchemists was killed by a cultivator, and his storage bag was taken away. We lost some pills, that's all. Shopkeeper Lu obviously didn't want to say too much and only said, however, I also brought some pills that can increase one's cultivation when I return this time. Fellow Taoists, it just so happens that I will let you two fellow Taoists choose first. The rest will be sent to the auction the day after tomorrow. The auction? Xiaohua was slightly surprised and thought to himself, there's also an auction in Yinabis City. Sure enough, when Shue Shue heard this, her eyes lit up and she smiled. That's the best. What kind of pills did Shopkeeper Lu bring back? If they're suitable, I can get some first. If Shopkeeper Lu sends them to the auction, the price will be hard to say. Hee, the key is that when it comes to the auction, these pills will be sold in batches and can't be sold separately. Fellow Taoist Shue and fellow Taoist Xiao will find it troublesome. As Shopkeeper Lu spoke, he clapped his hands and took out 4 jade bottles from his storage bag. He placed them on the jade table and smiled. These are the Peiyuan pill, marrow cleansing pill, clear ripple pill, and clean lotus pill. There are quite a few of them. Fellow Taoists, please take a look at them first. Fellow Taoist Xiao, or I first. Shue Shue glanced at Xiaohua and smiled. Naturally, fellow Taoist Shue first? Xiaohua smiled and said, in front of a beauty, I don't dare to be rude. Hee. Shue Shue seemed to like Xiaohua's words very much. Her eyes moved and she said, then I won't be polite. Fellow Taoist, please. Xiaohua raised his hand and said. Shue Shue looked at the quality first, so she naturally bid first. She also chose and bought the pills first. However, did Xiaohua care about this? Of course not, because Shue Shue raised her hand and picked up the jade bottle containing the Peiyuan pill. Shue Shue poured out a Peiyuan pill. She carefully looked at it in front of her eyes, then put it to the tip of her nose and sniffed it. She then passed it to Xiaohua and said, fellow Taoist Xiao, you should also take a look. Xiaohua took it and carefully looked at it. This Peiyuan pill was one size bigger than the one Xiao Yueheng refined. It was very smooth and slightly greasy in his hand. Moreover, before he could put the Peiyuan pill to the tip of his nose, a strong medicinal fragrance assailed his nostrils. Xiaohua shook his head slightly in his heart. Xiao Yueheng refined the Peiyuan pill before. Moreover, it was when Xiaohua was guarding the furnace that Xiao Yueheng refined 24 Peiyuan pills in one furnace. Those Peiyuan pills were not very smooth. In fact, there were slight bumps and depressions that couldn't be seen clearly. If one looked at it forcefully, there seemed to be some dense talismans hidden within. Not only that, that Peiyuan pill had a faint medicinal fragrance, but that was only faint and not as strong as this Peiyuan pill. After comparing the two, Xiaohua knew that the quality of this Peiyuan pill was far inferior to the one he took. Sure enough, in just a moment, Shue Shue had already looked at all 4 types of pills. She turned her head and asked with a smile, fellow Taoist Xiao, what do you think of this Peiyuan pill? Does fellow Taoist like it? Xiaohua smiled and put the Peiyuan pill into the jade bottle. He said, fellow Taoist Shue checked it first. Naturally, fellow Taoist Shue asked first. Since fellow Taoist Xiao is so polite, I won't be polite. Shue Shue nodded and then asked Shopkeeper Lu, may I know the price of this Peiyuan pill and marrow cleansing pill? Fellow Taoist Shue is a frequent customer of my store. I won't deceive fellow Taoist. This Peiyuan pill costs 1 high-grade spirit stone. Hiss, Xiaohua didn't wait for Shopkeeper Lu to finish and unconsciously sucked in a breath of cold air. What? Does fellow Taoist Xiao think it's too expensive? Shopkeeper Lu noticed and turned his head with a smile. This cultivation increasing pill is not common in my humble store. Generally, it is used by my sect's disciples. The pills that fellow Taoists saw were taken out by my sect as a last resort. This 1 high-grade spirit stone is only because you 2 fellow Taoists were fated to come across it. If it was the auction the day after tomorrow, you definitely wouldn't know the price. Shopkeeper Lu, what about the marrow cleansing pill? Shue Shue's expression didn't change as she pointed her finger and asked, oh, the marrow cleansing pill is naturally cheaper. 20 mid-grade spirit stones for 1 pill. Shopkeeper Lu said with a smile. Xiaohua was speechless. He had bought this baptizing marrow dan in Jinghua City's e-market, and he had also bought it at the Wind Station's e-market. However, he had only bought it for 5 or 10 spirit stones. Here, the price had doubled. Although the price is a bit expensive, it is still a cultivation increasing pill after all. It is understandable. Shueshue didn't ask about the price of the clear fragrance pill and clean lotus pill. She lowered her head and pondered for a while before saying, however, shopkeeper Lu's pills are still lacking in quality. It seems that the main ingredients for refining the pills are not too old. Fellow Taoist Shui is right. Nowadays, it is really difficult to find old ingredients. Although there is a price on the e-market, there is no supply. As the saying goes, even the cleverest housewife can't cook without rice, let alone refine pills. Shopkeeper Lu smiled bitterly and spread out his hands. 60 mid-grade spirit stones. I will buy 10 Peiyuan pill. Shueshue narrowed her eyes and said with a smile, if possible, I will also buy 20 marrow cleansing pills. This, fellow Taoist Shui, is really making things difficult for me. 60 mid-grade spirit stones is a bit too little. If fellow Taoist Shui offers 80 mid-grade spirit stones, I will also reduce the price of the marrow cleansing pill to 12 mid-grade spirit stones. What do you think? Shopkeeper Lu said unhurriedly. Great. Shueshue clapped her hands and said with a smile, I will do as Shopkeeper Lu says. Then, he took out 11 high-grade spirit stones from his storage bag and handed them over. He smiled and said, don't bother looking for the 60 mid-grade spirit stones. Just give me a foundation elixir, and I'll take it. Xiao Hua was stunned. He began to calculate the relationship between the spirit stones and the pill in his mind. Who would have thought that Shopkeeper Lu had already laughed and said, fellow Taoist Shui is really interesting. I already knew about fellow Taoist Shui's habit. Even if I didn't say it, I would have given fellow Taoist Shui an extra Peiyuan pill. -5. Chapter 1429. There's such a thing? Xiao Hua looked at the two of them, handing over spirit stones in one hand and taking pills in the other. He felt a bit awkward in his heart. Fellow Taoist Xiao, it's your turn. See which pills are suitable for you. Shueshue asked with a smile after putting away the pills. My cultivation is shallow. I'm afraid I won't be able to use the Peiyuan pill and marrow cleansing pill. What's the price of the Qingyi pill and clean lotus pill? Xiao Hua's gaze didn't even look at the Peiyuan Dan. He only picked up the bottle of Qingyi Dan and poured one out. When he saw the Qingyi Dan, he couldn't help but be slightly stunned. This Qingyi Dan was exactly the same as the Qingyi Dan he had taken in the beginning. No matter if it was the size or shape, or the rich medicinal fragrance, it was all the same. Could it be? Xiao Hua's heart moved, as if he thought of something. What? Could it be that fellow Taoist Xiao thinks the quality of this Qingyi pill isn't good? Shopkeeper Lu saw Xiao Hua's expression and slightly frowned. My humble sect's Peiyuan pill and marrow cleansing pill. As fellow Taoist Shui said, the quality is indeed a bit lacking due to the age of the main ingredients. But this Qingyi pill is different. The age of the main ingredients is just right. Xiao Hua came back to his senses and shook his head. Eyes thinking, such a good pill is probably several mid-grade spirit stones for one pill. I'm afraid I can't buy much. Ha ha ha. Shopkeeper Lu didn't say anything, but Shueshue laughed first. She pointed at Xiao Hua and said, fellow Taoist Xiao is really cute. Shopkeeper Lu, you must lower the price, otherwise, I'll be anxious with you first. Shueshue almost bent over with laughter. Cute? Xiao Hua touched his nose and thought gloomily. This is the first time I've heard someone say this. Indeed. Fellow Taoist Xiao came to my humble store for the first time. I'll consider it as forming a good karma. As for the Qingyi pill, 5 mid-grade spirit stones for one pill. Shopkeeper Lu squinted his eyes and said with a smile. Then, what about the clean lotus pill? Xiao Hua immediately asked. Clean lotus pill? Shopkeeper Lu was slightly startled, but he quickly regained his composure and said, the effect of the clean lotus pill is not as good as the clear breeze pill. As for the price, 2 mid-grade spirit stones for one pill. Then, do you have Guiji Dan or something like that? Xiao Hua asked again. That's strange, fellow Taoist Xiao. Shueshue said, The effects of the marrow-cleansing pill and the Peiyuan pill are extremely good. Even the Qing-Yi pill is not bad. Why does fellow Taoist keep looking for pills with poor effects? The spirit herbs used to refine those pills are all quite young. Xiao Hua smiled and said, I's cultivation is shallow. I don't dare to take those dawn. It's better to use some low-level dawn. Shuai knew that this was definitely not the real reason, but since Xiao Hua said so, Shuai naturally couldn't ask further. Shopkeeper Lu twirled his beard, thought for a moment and said, I did bring some Guiji Dan. If fellow Taoist Xiao needs it, I will pay 1 mid-grade spirit stone for 1 pill. Io, Shopkeeper Lu, this is where you are wrong. Guiji Dan. I'm afraid the price is too expensive. Shuai heard and immediately shouted, Fellow Taoist Shui, this Guiji Dan is used by I's disciples. I also saw that fellow Taoist Xiao came here for the first time, so I had no choice but to take it out a bit more expensive. Shopkeeper Lu said with a smile. So it's like that. Shopkeeper Lu's reason was very good. So Shuai didn't have the nerve to say anymore. Then, how many Guiji Dan, clean lotus pill, and clear breeze pill are there? Xiao Hua asked while holding his chin. Shopkeeper Lu raised his eyebrows and glanced at Shuai, not knowing what he was thinking. After a moment, he smiled and said, Fellow Taoist Xiao, could it be that you want to buy all of them? Or, are you here to inquire about the situation? Hiss. Shuai sucked in a breath of cold air and frowned slightly. She also moved slightly to the side. This? Xiao Hua smiled bitterly and cupped his hands. Shopkeeper Lu is thinking too much. This is my first time in Yinyuan City. How could I have other thoughts? Shopkeeper Lu stared at Xiao Hua for a long time. Seeing that there was nothing strange, he said coldly, this time, my humble store has 300 clear breeze pills, 800 clean lotus pills, and 100 Guiji Dan. Could it be that fellow Taoist Xiao wants to buy all of them? Shopkeeper Lu. Shuai exclaimed from the side. This time, your sect. How could? Fellow Taoist Shui, don't speak first. I will explain this later. Shopkeeper Lu waved his hand and stopped her. Fellow Taoist Xiao, please speak first. On the side, Xiao Hua's mind was spinning rapidly. This was definitely a rare opportunity. The 3 types of pills added together were only 3,200 mid-grade spirit stones, which was equivalent to 32 high-grade spirit stones. For the current Xiao Hua, this was nothing, but, seeing that Shopkeeper Lu was already suspicious, could he still buy them? Moreover, after he entered the 4th level of Qi refining, the clear breeze pill no longer had the same effect as before. It would be a waste to buy it now. After thinking for a moment, Xiao Hua raised his head and said, Shopkeeper Lu, I only have 30 high-grade spirit stones here. I'm afraid it's not enough to buy these pills. Would Shopkeeper Lu be willing to part with them? Fellow Taoist Xiao, you really want to buy them? This time it was Shuai's turn to be flabbergasted. She advised, no matter what kind of pill it is, as long as it's taken a few times, its effect will gradually weaken. Unless it's a pill like the Peiyuan pill, which has been used for a long time. Fellow Taoist, buying so many will be useless. All right, deal. Shopkeeper Lu extended his hand and said. Xiao Hua understood and also extended his hand. The two's palms hit each other as an agreement. Sigh. Shuai glanced at Xiao Hua and shook her head. Fellow Taoist Xiao, in 2 days. There are still many Peiyuan pill and marrow-cleansing pill up for auction. Fellow Taoist low-grade pills. I'm afraid they won't attract the attention of others. Shopkeeper Lu said with a smile. As he spoke, Shopkeeper Lu took out a storage pouch from his sleeve and handed it over. Xiao Hua opened it and took a look. He put the jade bottles inside into his own storage pouch and then gave the 30 high-grade spirit stones to Shopkeeper Lu. On the side, Shuai saw Xiao Hua take out 30 high-grade spirit stones without even frowning. She could only sigh. Fellow Taoist Xiao, as expected, you hid your strength well. You actually have so many high-grade spirit stones in your storage pouch. Could it be? You're not afraid that I will covet them? Xiao Hua put away the storage pouch and clapped his hands. I was afraid a moment ago, but now I'm not. There are only some low-grade pills that fellow Taoist Shui doesn't care about. What's there to be afraid of? That's true. Shui didn't expect Xiaohua to answer in such a way. Shopkeeper Lu's eyes were different from before. There was another meaning in the coldness, as if Xiaohua was his opponent in the auction. "Io, Shopkeeper Lu, weren't you going to tell I why your sect took out so many pills? What's the reason?" Shui suddenly thought of something and quickly asked. "Hee, actually, it's nothing much. Our humble sect needs some spirit stones, and also needs to use medicinal pills to exchange for some other things. Our humble sect can't compare to Shuanyan School, much less the Seven Skills sect, so we can only use medicinal pills to exchange. Ordinary medicinal pills aren't worth much spirit stones, so we can only use medicinal pills to increase our magic power." Shopkeeper Lu laughed. It's that simple?" Shui asked with wide eyes. "It's that simple," Shopkeeper Lu said calmly. He then waved his hand and said with a smile, "I still have some things to take care of, so I won't be accompanying you. If you two have time, you can rest for a while and try some of our specialty spirit fruits." "Excuse me." After he finished speaking, Shopkeeper Lu cupped his hands and went up to the third floor. After Xiaohua and Shui bowed, they looked at each other and said with a smile, "Shopkeeper Lu, he's sending us off. Fellow Taoist Shui, let's go out." "Hee, please." After the two of them left the shop and walked on the street, Shui couldn't help but say, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, you're really lucky. There aren't many pills that can increase magic power in this world. Imperial Pill Sect must have gone through a great change, so they took out so many pills. Moreover, you actually ran into them. Oh my brain. Why couldn't I buy more?" Shui seemed to have suddenly thought of something and turned around to walk back into the shop. Xiaohua laughed in his heart, but he shouted, "Fellow Taoist Shui, you didn't take advantage of the opportunity just now. If you go back now, will they still sell it to you?" "AI, that's right." Shui angrily slapped her forehead. Why didn't I think of that?" Fellow Taoist Xiao, can you give some of your pills to I?" Shui blinked and asked Xiaohua with a smile. "What? Fellow Taoist Shui has thought of the auction the day after tomorrow?" Xiaohua said with a smile. Yes. Could it be that fellow Taoist Xiao didn't take out so many pills for the auction the day after tomorrow?" Shui asked curiously. Hee, this is I's first time in Yinyuan City. How would I know about the auction the day after tomorrow? I only found out after hearing fellow Taoist Shui's words just now. Xiaohua replied, "Moreover, the Imperial Pill Sect took out so many Peiyuan pill and marrow cleansing pill. This clear fragrance pill and other low-grade pills are simply not worth their attention. If they took them out to bid, they would only lower the price of their own Peiyuan pill and marrow cleansing pill. They might as well give it to I first, and then take out pills of better quality later." "Haha, so fellow Taoist Xiao is still going to the auction?" Shui said with a smile. "That's right, fellow Taoist Shui is right. I only said that I didn't know about the auction, but I didn't say that I wouldn't participate the day after tomorrow." Xiaohua said calmly. "Then, does fellow Taoist Xiao have an invitation talisman for the auction?" Shui's eyes narrowed into slits. "Invitation talisman?" Xiaohua's eyes turned quickly, and he shook his head. "I really don't have one. Then I will make a deal with fellow Taoist Xiao." Shui patted her storage bag, took out a red-yellow talisman, and said with a smile, "I have an invitation talisman for the auction. If fellow Taoist gives half of the clear fragrance pill to I will give this invitation talisman to fellow Taoist." "This," Xiaohua said with difficulty, 30 high-grade spirit stones is I's entire fortune. I'm using these pills to exchange for some spirit stones. -5. Chapter 1430. I can give fellow Taoist Xiao more spirit stones. Shui saw that Xiaohua's tone was slightly relaxed and immediately said, "How much does fellow Taoist Xiao think is appropriate?" How can fellow Taoist Shui say that I'm that unscrupulous?" Xiaohua quickly waved his hand and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao only needs to give I the same price as before." "Really?" Shui was a bit in disbelief. "Of course." Xiaohua smiled and extended his hand. "Fellow Taoist Shui, give fellow Taoist I the spirit stones first." "Okay." Shui wasn't afraid that Xiaohua would go back on his word. She patted her storage pouch and took out the high-grade spirit stones. Xiaohua didn't hold back and put them all into his storage pouch with a flick of his sleeve. Then, he gave half of the Qingyi pill to Xue Xue. After putting the Qingyi pill into the storage pouch, Xue Xue let out a sigh of relief. She handed over the auction invitation and her own communication talisman and said, "The auction will begin at noon the day after tomorrow. It will be held in Yinyuan City's treasure auction pavilion. If fellow Taoist can't find the place, you can send a message to me. I will come and find fellow Taoists to go together." Xiaohua took it and smiled. "Thank you, fellow Taoist Xue. However, I'll ask one more question. Can this invitation only allow one person to participate?" "Of course not." Xue Xue blinked and said, "Each invitation can bring one person. Fellow Taoist Xiao can rest assured." "Hee, that's good. I have a fellow Taoist with me. If I go alone, I'm afraid it won't be appropriate." "Fellow Taoist?" Xue Xue's black eyes looked at Xiaohua thoughtfully and smiled. Could it be fellow Taoist Zhao's dual cultivation partner? Xiaohua's face was very awkward. After all, they weren't the only two people on the street. Xiaohua saw that there was no one around, so he gave the essence cleansing pill to Xue Xue. At this time, there were already people passing by them. Xue Xue's voice was also loud, so a few cultivators looked at Xiaohua curiously. "Fellow Taoist Xue, don't tease I." Xiaohua scratched his head and said, with eyes cultivation, "Who would be willing to dual cultivate with I?" "Hee, you're right," Xue Xue said proudly. "Do you want me to introduce you to a few fellow Taoists from the Immortal Beauty sect?" I still have some mundane matters to attend to, so I'll take my leave now. Fellow Taoist Xue, I'll see you at the treasure auction pavilion the day after tomorrow." Xiaohua saw that Xue Xue's words were somewhat unreliable. He didn't know Xue Xue's background, so he didn't dare to pester her too much. He hurriedly cupped his hands and took his leave. Xue Xue saw Xiaohua quickly leave, but because she didn't chase after him, she only thoughtfully looked at Xiaohua's back. When he disappeared, she pursed her lips into a smile and walked in another direction. Just as Xue Xue turned around, her eyes nonchalantly looked at a nearby store that sold yellow talismans. Outside the store, there were several cultivators with their heads lowered as they chose yellow talismans. When Xue Xue's figure also disappeared, the cultivators picked up the yellow talismans they had already chosen. One of them hurriedly walked towards the elixir school shop, while the others hurriedly chased after Xiaohua. So he really isn't on the same side as Xue Xue. In the elixir school shop, shopkeeper Lu was listening to the report of the person who just returned. He said in a low voice, "Also, this guy actually gave half of the marrow cleansing pills to Xue Xue. Could it be that he already knew Xue Xue's background? Or perhaps this guy is here for Xue Xue and not related to our elixir school's matter?" Sigh. If that's really the case, wouldn't these pills be a bit of a waste? If we can bring them to the auction, we should be able to get more spirit stones. You may leave. Let the disciples keep an eye on him for a while longer. It might be that guy's trick. Shopkeeper Lu waved his hand and dismissed the disciple. He sat down, picked up a teacup, and took a sip. His brows were tightly furrowed as he looked at the beautiful scenery outside the window. He sighed and said, "This Xiaohua is also a loose cultivator. Could it be related to Marshal Uncle Bien's death? Sect Master took out so many pills. Is he trying to lure out the murderer? Or does he have other plans? Could it be those rumors are true? If so, won't the cultivation world undergo a great change?" Sigh. I don't have much time left. Why should I think so much? This change, I'm afraid it will only happen after I die. Sect Master is thinking for the elixir school, but I don't need to, right? Shopkeeper Lu said leisurely. He took out a heart-intoxicating fruit from the jade plate and put it into his mouth. In a moment, his face was flushed, and he squinted his eyes slightly. He seemed to be enjoying it very much. Xiaohua didn't know that he had really been targeted by the disciples of the elixir school and had caused another trouble. He left in a hurry. When he was far away, he saw that Xue Xue hadn't caught up with him. He couldn't help but wipe the non-existent sweat from his forehead and muttered, "Why is there such a big difference between female cultivators? Kaizhuoxia, Xue Xue, and the disciples of the Immortal Beauty School. Why are they so different?" Hehe, if Kaizhuoxia was as forthright as Xue Xue, she would have chased him all the way to the Utopia faction, right? Xiao Hua thought as he strolled around Yinyuan City happily. This time, he was able to get so many Qingyi pills and clean lotus pills from the shop of the elixir school. It was really beyond his expectations. Now that he thought about it, it was like a dream. Yes, the pills he had been looking for a long time were actually solved with only 32 pieces of high-grade spirit stones. It was even more convenient than the EG of the wind station. The heavens do as I wish. Xiao Hua rubbed his nose and said to himself, when did this poor Taoist's moral standing become so good? Could it be that the heavens just gave I a chance to enter the Huanhua sect? The streets of Yinyuan City were extremely wide. 10 flying carriages like the one pulled by the flying feather beasts could walk side by side. The shops on both sides of the street were also different from those in Jinghua City. There were many pavilions with more than 5 floors. Xiao Hua walked around for a while and saw a shop in front of him with the words, Fu Family's Talisman, written on it. Thinking that the Earth Escape talisman in his space had long been used up, and the talisman paper and talisman ink for making yellow talismans had also been used up, Xiao Hua lifted his leg and walked in. Not far behind him, the few disciples of the elixir school who had been tailing him passed by the entrance of the Fu Family's talisman as if nothing had happened. They didn't even look into the shop. After the disciples had left, Xiao Hua's figure jumped out of the shop again. He looked around and thought to himself, could it be that I was overthinking? It seems very normal. Then Xiao Hua walked in again. Not far away, the disciples of the elixir school spread out again and watched the Fu Family's talisman closely. Xiao Hua was just being cautious. How could he be a match for the specially trained disciples of the elixir school? The interior of the Fu Family's shop was similar to that of the elixir school shop. Behind the various restrictions on the walls, high-grade yellow talismans could be seen at a glance. At the bottom of the walls, mid-grade yellow talismans were arranged neatly according to the categories of defense and attack. On the left-hand side, there was a huge jade shelf. All kinds of talisman crafting materials were arranged neatly according to their categories. There weren't many shop assistants in the shop, but there were many cultivators who came to visit. Xiao Hua first entered the shop, then left. When he entered the shop again, there really weren't any shop assistants who came to greet him. Xiao Hua stood for a moment and was looking around. A shop assistant saw him and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, please feel free to look around first. When I'm done, I'll come over to greet you." Haha, got it. I'll take a look around first. Xiao Hua cupped his hands and walked around casually in the shop. After this period of cultivation, Xiao Hua's talisman crafting technique had greatly improved. Not to mention fireball talismans, he could also successfully craft icicle talismans and confinement talismans. Of course, he didn't need to let others see his talisman crafting technique anymore. These yellow talismans weren't drawn with talisman brushes. What's this? Xiao Hua walked to a corner of the wall and saw a silk cloth about a foot long casually tossed there. There were some words on it. Most of the words were covered, and only a few words were exposed. It read, Talisman Crafting, Disciple, 3rd layer of aura refining. Could it be talisman crafting technique? Xiao Hua's heart skipped a beat. Just as he was about to take a closer look, the shop assistant who greeted him just now walked over and cupped his hands. Fellow Taoist, have you picked a yellow talisman that you like? When Xiao Hua heard this, he pointed at it and asked, What's this? This? The shop assistant looked at what Xiao Hua was pointing at and said with a smile, This is a notice that our Fu family is recruiting talisman crafting disciples. A notice? Can I take a look? Xiao Hua asked. Of course. Fellow Taoist, please. As the shop assistant spoke, he picked up the silk cloth and handed it to Xiao Hua. He then said, This notice has been hanging outside my humble shop for a long time, but I couldn't find a suitable disciple. So, I stopped hanging it for the past few days and threw it here. Xiao Hua took it and carefully looked at it. He saw the following words written on it. The Fu family, a talisman crafting clan, is recruiting talisman crafting disciples. Must have a cultivation level of at least the 3rd layer of aura refining and can craft simple low-grade yellow talismans. If you don't have a foundation in talisman crafting, you must have a cultivation level of at least the 5th layer of aura refining. If you have outstanding aptitude and can craft high-grade yellow talismans, you can join our Fu family and become a core disciple. You also have the opportunity to become a guest elder of the Fu family. Huh, your Fu family. How did you recruit disciples from outside? Could it be that the Fu family doesn't have enough disciples? Xiaohua asked curiously. Fellow Taoist, do you know how to craft talismans? Do you also want to join our Fu family? The shop assistant looked at Xiaohua's cultivation level and didn't answer his question. Instead, he said, if fellow Taoist knows how to craft talismans and is also a loose cultivator, our Fu family would be the best choice. Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. He smiled and said, I might be a loose cultivator, but I'm afraid that it wouldn't be appropriate for me to join the Fu family for no reason. The shop assistant smiled and took the silk cloth out. It was obvious that he was going to hang the notice of recruiting talisman crafting disciples outside. Not long after, he returned and said, Fellow Taoist, you might not know this, but crafting talismans is different from cultivating. Our Fu family's disciples with the surname Fu all know how to craft ordinary talismans. However, crafting high-grade yellow talismans requires talent and skill. Many disciples with the surname Fu are unable to master the crafting method of high-grade yellow talismans. Therefore, every few years, our Fu family will recruit some talented disciples from outside the family. These disciples can cultivate while crafting yellow talismans. Our Fu family will also select the most outstanding disciples from these disciples and recruit them as core disciples to cultivate our Fu family's inherited cultivation method. -5. Chapter 1431. The shop assistant from the Fu clan told Xiaohua about the recruitment of talisman crafting disciples and said with a smile, even though my Fu clan can't be compared to a famous sect, we're still an aristocratic family that specializes in talisman crafting. We have talisman crafting techniques and cultivation techniques, so we're very attractive to rogue cultivators. Many rogue cultivators who know how to craft talismans have sought refuge in my Fu clan. Fellow Taoist, if you're interested, I'll ask the shopkeeper to come down and test your talisman crafting techniques. Don't. Xiaohua hurriedly waved his hand and said, I was just casually asking. I've never thought of learning talisman crafting techniques. The shop assistant glanced at Xiaohua and said, if fellow Taoist is interested, you should hurry up. The standards for the recruitment of disciples this time are relatively high, so there might be some good treatment. For example, there might be some good talisman crafting techniques. When Xiaohua heard the recruitment standards again, he immediately became anxious and said inwardly, this might be reserved for some disciple. Why would I feel uncomfortable? Thus, he smiled and said, fellow Taoist, does your Fu clan have any Earth Escape talismans? Oh, this way please. Seeing that Xiaohua wanted to look at the Earth Escape talismans, the shop assistant didn't say anything about the recruitment of disciples. He led Xiaohua to the side of the Earth Escape talismans and took out a yellow talisman for Xiaohua to appraise. Xiaohua looked at it and asked for the price. The price of this Earth Escape talisman was slightly more expensive than the ones Xiaohua bought in the past. However, the Earth Escape talisman had saved Xiaohua's life several times before. Therefore, Xiaohua haggled a few times and bought a lot of Earth Escape talismans. Then, Xiaohua bought a lot of talisman paper and talisman ink before preparing to leave. Fellow Taoist, my humble shop still has high-grade confinement talismans and high-grade iron cloak talismans. Does fellow Taoist not want to take a look? Seeing that Xiaohua was very generous, the shop assistant couldn't help but recommend. These yellow talismans, I still have them for the time being. I don't intend to buy them. Xiaohua smiled and suddenly thought of something and asked, that's right. Does your shop have a type of yellow talisman that can transmit messages further away? The distance of ordinary transmission talismans is too short. Fellow Taoist is right. The shop assistant pointed to the side and said, this is a 1,000-mile sound transmitting talisman, a high-grade sound transmitting talisman. It can be sent to a fixed location, and it can also be transmitted to a cultivator from a very far distance after he injects his magic power. Not bad. Xiaohua was overjoyed when he heard this. Although the 1,000-mile sound transmitting talisman cost a lot of spirit stones, Xiaohua still bought a few of them. Yes, I bought an invisibility talisman in Jinghua City last time. I wonder if your shop has it? Xiao Hua suddenly asked with a smile when he saw that there were many strange yellow talismans in the Fu clan's shop. Invisibility talisman? When the shop assistant heard this, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. Fellow Taoist, you're really lucky. I've never heard of the Fu clan selling invisibility talismans. Those are top-grade yellow talismans. Oh no, it should be called a talisman. Spirit talisman? Xiao Hua rolled his eyes and said with a smile, then, I'd like to ask fellow Taoist again. Does the Fu clan have a talisman that can suppress a cultivator's cultivation? The shop assistant scratched his head and said awkwardly, I've heard of it, but as for the specifics, oh, if fellow Taoist really wants to buy it, I can ask the shopkeeper of my humble shop to explain it to fellow Taoist. The shop assistant looked at Xiao Hua's fourth-layer aura refining cultivation and didn't think he would buy this kind of talisman. Unexpectedly, Xiao Hua said, since that's the case, I'd like to ask the shopkeeper of your shop to come over for a chat. The shop assistant nodded helplessly and said, please follow I, fellow Taoist. After saying that, the shop assistant led Xiao Hua to the second floor. The layout of the second floor of the Fu clan shop was different from the second floor of the Imperial Pill School shop, but they were both spacious. A 40-something-year-old cultivator around the ninth layer of aura refining invited Xiao Hua to take a seat and offered him some fragrant tea. He said with a smile, I'm Fuing Min. How should I address fellow Taoist? Xiao Hua didn't dare to be impolite. He cupped his hands and said, I'm Xiao Hua. Greetings, senior. Hee, there's no need. Fellow Taoist is our humble shop's breadwinner, so there's no need to be polite. Fuing Min waved his hand with a smile. I heard from the shop assistant that fellow Taoist wants to buy a talisman that can suppress cultivation. Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking. Xiao Hua didn't hide anything and answered. Fellow Taoist Zhao's cultivation. Can you tell I why fellow Taoist wants a talisman that can suppress cultivation? This talisman isn't something fellow Taoist can use, right? Fuing Min asked. I have a fellow Taoist who sent a message to I saying that he needs this kind of talisman. However, it's inconvenient for him to come out since he's in closed-door meditation. When he saw that I came out to travel, he handed this matter to I. As for why he needs this kind of talisman, I don't know either. Xiao Hua explained, actually, I've never heard of this kind of talisman. Just now, I was just casually asking the shop assistant. I didn't expect to get a definite answer. So that's how it is. Fuing Min nodded and said with a smile, like I said, how could fellow Taoist know about this kind of talisman? I'm afraid the invisibility talisman was also purchased by that fellow Taoist, right? Xiao Hua's mind spun rapidly. He knew that what Fuing Min said was definitely reasonable, so he nodded with a smile. Haha, presumably fellow Taoist also doesn't know, right? The invisibility talisman, that's a talisman. The magic power required to make a talisman can't be underestimated. Those below the 6th level of Qi refining can't use it. As for the talisman that fellow Taoist mentioned, it's the Qingyun talisman. Those below the 10th level of Qi refining can't use it. So you're saying your sect has this kind of Qingyun talisman? Xiao Hua asked, overjoyed. Unexpectedly, Fuing Min shook her head and said, No? Then, Xiao Hua was greatly surprised. Alas, talismans are a talisman crafting technique that's even more profound than yellow talismans. My Fu clan's ancestors did have some talisman crafting techniques, but the Fu clan's descendants have limited aptitudes and can't completely inherit it. Many talismans, not only talismans, even some high-level yellow talismans, have been lost. Fuing Min sighed and said, it's not just my Fu clan. In fact, many cultivation clans are also facing this kind of awkward situation. On one hand, they have cultivation techniques. On the other hand, they can't find suitable descendants. It's difficult to continue the bloodline. Hearing this, Xiao Hua's mind spun rapidly. He opened his mouth, but closed it again. This kind of Fu clan matter should only be known by Fu clan descendants. I wonder, why did Fuing Min tell me this? Of course, Xiao Hua also believed that even if he didn't ask, Fuing Min would explain the reason. Sure enough, Fuing Min opened her mouth and said, Fellow Taoist Xiao, since my humble shop doesn't have this Qingyun talisman, Why did I invite fellow Taoist to come up for a chat? Exactly. Please enlighten me, fellow Taoist Fu. Xiao Hua said with a smile. Fellow Taoist Xiao, you must be a loose cultivator, right? Fu Yingmin probed. I am indeed a loose cultivator. Xiao Hua looked straight at Fu Yingmin. He didn't evade her gaze and answered very decisively. Fellow Taoist Xiao looks to be 17 or 18 years old, but is only in the 4th layer of qi refining. The possibility of you being a loose cultivator is really too high. Fu Yingmin had a look of understanding and explained. Actually, as a disciple of a cultivation sect, fellow Taoist Zhao's cultivation is a bit lacking. Even if you're a descendant of an aristocratic clan, it's still barely passable. Of course, if you're a loose cultivator, then it's a different matter. Fellow Taoist cultivation is also not bad. However, as a loose cultivator, you lack a lot of things. Cultivation techniques, medicinal pills, guidance, experience, and so on. Every one of these things will hinder fellow Taoist progress. If fellow Taoist wants to make further progress, then you can only join a cultivation sect or aristocratic clan. Fellow Taoist Xiao must also know that the disciples accepted by cultivation sects are either young or have a cultivation level of the 10th layer of qi refining. Fellow Taoist, I'm afraid you won't be able to meet the requirements. I understand. Xiao Hua suddenly understood. After saying so much, Fu Yingmin wanted him to join the Fu clan. It's good that fellow Taoist understands. I heard from Fu Yu that fellow Taoist knows some talisman crafting techniques. Fellow Taoist Xiao isn't very old, and his cultivation level isn't low. If you join my Fu clan, even if you don't have great achievements in cultivation, you might have some achievements in talisman crafting, right? Fellow Taoist Xiao, why not? Xiao Hua was a bit dumbfounded all of a sudden. Previously, he had racked his brains to join a cultivation sect and obtain cultivation techniques, but this cultivation aristocratic clan, he had never thought about joining. That was because he felt that they would definitely be the descendant of a direct descendant or a branch family, and he wouldn't have a chance. Now that this opportunity had suddenly appeared, Xiao Hua didn't know how to choose. After a moment, Xiao Hua smiled bitterly and said, Senior Fu, please allow me to think about this matter a bit more. I'm afraid I can't give Senior a reply right now. I naturally know this, and I didn't want fellow Taoist to make a decision right away. Fu Yingmin smiled and said, Fellow Taoist Xiao only needs to carefully think about what I said and give me an answer within half a year. Half a year? My Fu clan will hold a selection in half a year. My Yin Abyss city will have a quota. If fellow Taoist Xiao is interested, you can come within the time limit. Xiao Hua nodded and said, Many thanks for Senior's care. Junior will carefully think about it. After saying this, Fu Yingmin sent Xiao Hua to the stairs and cupped her hands to bid farewell. Xiao Hua walked out of the Fu clan's shop in a daze. He had never thought that he would encounter such a situation when he casually walked into a yellow talisman shop. Even when he returned to the inn, he still didn't know whether he should go or not. What am I thinking about? Xiao Hua suddenly slapped his forehead and said with a smile, I'm so stupid. Isn't there just a disciple of an aristocratic clan in front of me? I only need to ask. Kai Zhuoxia's mood wasn't very high, and she was somewhat worried. However, she was a female cultivator after all. When she heard that Xiao Hua had encountered such a thing, she also became interested. She looked at Xiao Hua from head to toe and said, Fellow Taoist Xiao, with your current cultivation level and age, you can be considered an outstanding individual among rogue cultivators. That shopkeeper of the Fu clan didn't see wrong. However, even if that's the case, he still made a mistake. Can fellow Taoist Zhao's cultivation be based on what you see on the surface? Fellow Taoist Kai, I only want to ask, do you think I should enter the Fu clan? Xiao Hua waved his hand and asked directly. -5. Chapter 1432. I feel that. Fellow Taoist Xiao doesn't need to join the Fu clan. Kai Zhuoxia said without hesitation, Shopkeeper Fu wants fellow Taoist to join the Fu clan because he wants fellow Taoist to learn the art of making talismans and become a talisman master of the Fu clan. Since fellow Taoist doesn't have the surname Fu, even if you join the Fu clan, you will only be able to make ordinary talismans. I'm afraid they won't let fellow Taoist practice making high-grade talismans. Besides, What fellow Taoist needs now is a cultivation technique. As long as you have the basic cultivation technique, the art of making talismans is just a trivial matter. Even if fellow Taoist talisman-making skills are superb, and you become a guest elder of the Fu clan in the future, but in terms of cultivation techniques, they definitely won't teach you the complete set of cultivation techniques. You will still be a high-level talisman master of the Fu clan. Actually, to be honest, fellow Taoist, I have also considered whether fellow Taoist should join the Kai clan, but fellow Taoist Zhao's terrifying cultivation speed and other divine abilities. I feel that if fellow Taoist Xiao were to join the Kai clan, your talents would definitely be buried, so I didn't dare to ask. If fellow Taoist Xiao wants to join the Fu clan, it would be better for fellow Taoist Xiao to join the Kai clan. At least in terms of cultivation techniques, fellow Taoist Xiao will not be treated unfairly. Hearing Kai Zhuoxia's honest words, Xiao Hua suddenly understood. Kai Zhuoxia had always invited him to join the Kai clan, and before he left alone, she changed her mind. It seemed that there was a hidden meaning behind her words. Of course, if the Fu clan really has some talismans, and fellow Taoist Xiao feels that, in terms of cultivation, fellow Taoist Xiao can't make any progress, it's not impossible for fellow Taoist Xiao to practice it. Finally, Kai Zhuoxia gave an ambiguous smile. All right, thank you for your reminder, fellow Taoist Kai. Xiao Hua smiled and told Kai Zhuoxia about the auction the day after tomorrow, asking for her opinion. Contrary to Xiao Hua's expectations, Kai Zhuoxia was very happy and said, "The auction is the most lively. There are often rare items that don't appear in the marketplace. Since there is such a good thing, we naturally have to go. It doesn't matter if we go a day or a day later." That's good. Fellow Taoist Kai, have a good rest. We'll participate in the auction together the day after tomorrow. Xiao Hua prepared to leave. Don't be in such a hurry, fellow Taoist Xiao. This auction has always been controlled by the number of participants. Those who have nothing to do with it don't even know about it, let alone enter. Fellow Taoist, you just went out for a stroll and received an invitation talisman. What's going on? There won't be any traps, right? Xiao Hua originally wanted to avoid the important matters and dwell on the trivial matters, but he didn't expect Kai Zhuoxia to delve deeper into it. Thus, after thinking for a moment, he told her the whole story. Of course, he definitely wouldn't tell the truth about the number of medicinal pills, and only made up some nonsense. This Xue, who was she? I've never heard of a cultivator family with the surname Xue in the kingdom of Xi. Kai Zhuoxia frowned. But if he's from a cultivation sect, his age and cultivation level, it doesn't seem right. Who cares about her? Xiao Hua said with a smile. We only received her invitation talisman, and this auction wasn't organized by her alone, so how could it be disadvantageous to us? Once the auction is over, we will leave Yinyuan City. What is there to be afraid of? Fellow Taoist Xiao, there are some things that we can't let our guard down. Most of the time, even the tiniest details can be life-threatening. Perhaps. Xiao Hua shrugged. Thinking about the situation with Xue just now, she also couldn't think of any traps. The most important thing was that Xiao Hua didn't tell her the truth about the invitation talisman. Leaving aside the fact that Xiao Hua came out of Kai Zhuoxia's room and returned to his own room to cultivate, the disciples of the Imperial Pill sect saw Xiao Hua return to the inn in a daze. They first asked the inn's staff a few questions, then left a few disciples to guard the inn's entrance, and the rest returned to the Imperial Pill sect's shop. After listening to the disciples' report, shopkeeper Lu muttered in his heart, "He's with a female cultivator who might be a descendant of an aristocratic family? Could it be that Xiao Hua bought so many medicinal pills and brought them back to the clan? This could also be explained. But clear fragrance pills and the like are only low-level medicinal pills that can increase one's cultivation level. Which cultivator family would buy so many at once? It couldn't be that some other cultivator family also heard the rumors and wanted to stockpile spirit stones like my Imperial Pill sect, right? This matter seems to be only known by the Immortal Union. Right, my Imperial Pill sect master is old friends with someone from the Immortal Union, so he leaked a little bit of information. Moreover, he was also warned not to leak it. Other cultivator families, how could they know? Shopkeeper Lu thought for a while, then ordered his disciples to withdraw, leaving only one to watch Xiaohua's trail. 2 days passed by very quickly. Xiaohua had enough clear fragrance pills in his space. During this period of time, he didn't even leave his room, only quietly cultivating. Only when the 4 walls of his room flashed with brilliance did Xiaohua open his eyes and open the restriction on the door. Kaixuoxiao was already standing at the door in high spirits, waiting to follow Xiaohua to the treasure auction pavilion. Kaixuoxiao had been to Yinyuan City before, so she was very clear about the location of the treasure auction pavilion. Xiaohua followed her for an hour and arrived at a plaza in the center of the city. This plaza was rather large and oval in shape. On the plaza, there were dozens of towering pillars that pierced straight into the blue sky. On the pillars, there were many relief carvings of different shapes. On the carvings, there were faint runes that flickered in and out of existence under the noon sun. In front of each pillar, there was a tall cultivator dressed in armor. His hands were either holding a spear or a halberd or a sword. He stood majestically at the side. They should be the city guards of Yinyuan City. Many of the scattered cultivators in the plaza stayed far away from these armored city guards. The pillars in the plaza were very eye-catching, so Xiaohua's eyes were completely attracted to them before he could see anything else. Seeing Xiaohua like this, Kaixuoxiao said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, didn't you ask a few days ago about the difference between Xiunyuan sect's defensive formation and Jinghua City's defensive formation? This is the defensive formation of Yinyuan City, the Yinyuan Limitless Formation. Yinyuan City got its name from this formation." Yinyuan Limitless Formation? Xiaohua muttered to himself. His eyes roamed over the pillars for a moment, then he said in a low voice, "Compared to Jinghua City's defensive formation, which one is stronger?" "Fellow Taoist Xiao is strange. Why do you always want to ask who is stronger?" Kaixuoxiao pursed her lips and smiled. "I don't know who is stronger. I only know that the Yinyuan Limitless Formation is the most suitable formation for Yinyuan City. These pillars can extract the spiritual energy of heaven and earth from the spirit veins under Yinyuan City. It can be used for both defense and attack. It is said that back in the day, several nascent soul cultivators joined forces to attack Yinyuan City, but they couldn't succeed. Instead, one of them was injured by this formation." Several nascent soul cultivators? Xiaohua was shocked. He looked at the pillars again in disbelief. This Yinyuan Limitless Formation, is this powerful? The Tao of formations is profound and unfathomable. Unfortunately, many of them have already been lost. Kaixuoxiao sighed. Even the profound Heaven sect, which is famous for its formations in Lian country, is rumored to have withered away. Formations. Xiaohua muttered. That's the treasure auction pavilion," Kaixuoxiao said as she pointed to a tall 6-story pavilion on the west side of the plaza. Xiaohua came back to his senses and looked over. The entire auction pavilion was overflowing with light and was emitting all kinds of brilliance. It was extremely dazzling under the sunlight. Fellow Taoist Xiao, look to the east. That pointy tower-shaped pavilion is the weaponry workshop. It's where Yinyuan City sells magic tools and treasures. However, it's only open to cultivators above the 11th level of Qi refining, so we can't enter for now. The round gourd-like pavilion on the north side is the Herb Gathering Hall. It's where you buy spirit herbs and pills. The square pavilion on the south side is called the Jade Talisman House. It sells yellow talismans and spirit talismans. It's said that the legendary jade talismans can occasionally appear. I'm sure fellow Taoist Xiao knows which sect built these 3 pavilions. Of course. The weaponry workshop is the property of the Qiqiao sect. The Herb Gathering Hall is the property of the Xuanyan school. As for the Jade Talisman House, it's definitely the property of the Splendid sect. Xiaohua glanced over and answered with a smile. Fellow Taoist is right. That's exactly the case. Kaixuoxiao looked at the 3 towering pavilions with envy. The 3 great cultivation sects of the country of Xi are indeed worthy of their reputation. Then what about the treasure auction pavilion? Which sect does it belong to? Xiaohua asked curiously. Kaixuoxiao laughed. Is there even a need to ask? When Xiaohua heard this, he was extremely regretful and said, "This poor Taoist was wrong. This poor Taoist only looked at the cultivation sects and cultivation families and forgot about Yinyuan City. Hee, that's right. This treasure auction pavilion is the property of Yinyuan City. Kaixuoxia smiled sweetly and said, "Let's go, fellow Taoist Xiao. It's already late. Let's go in earlier." Xiao Hua followed Kaixuoxia to the front of the treasure auction pavilion. The entrance hall of the treasure auction pavilion was extremely large. A row of armored city guards stood at the entrance, inspecting the invitations of cultivators who wanted to enter the treasure auction pavilion. The rows of city guards gradually decreased from the middle to the sides according to their cultivation level. The cultivators who wanted to enter also wisely chose to pass in front of the city guards according to their cultivation level. After entering the treasure auction pavilion, the lighting inside was a bit dim. Even the area in front of them was dark, and they couldn't see anything clearly. Xiao Hua looked around and didn't see any city guards coming to greet them. He unconsciously stopped. Why did fellow Taoist Xiao stop? Kaixuoxia also stopped and asked curiously. Xiao Hua pointed to the front and said in a low voice, "Why is it so dark inside? It doesn't feel normal." Kaixuoxia turned her head and looked. She pulled Xiao Hua to the side and said in a low voice, "Extremely rare items often appear during the auction. In order to protect the cultivators who are bidding, the auction will set up a restriction before entering the venue. This restriction cannot be passed through by divine sense. The cultivators who are bidding can put on a mask or use some kind of spell to hide their face or cultivation level. This dark area in front of us is precisely the restriction set up by the treasure auction pavilion. -5. Chapter 1433. Oh, so it's like that. Xiao Hua slightly nodded. Fellow Taoist Xiao, let's also go. However, since, according to Ai's previous experience, everyone except those who didn't conceal their identity will appear alone in the auction. I'm afraid I can't travel with fellow Taoist Xiao. Kaixuoxia hesitated for a moment before speaking. Okay, then we'll do as fellow Taoist Kai said. Xiao Hua nodded. He knew that Kaixuoxia had some top-grade spirit stones in her storage pouch. Presumably, she wanted to bid for some things in this auction and bring them back to Liu Yang's Kai clan. These were all cultivators' privacy, so Xiao Hua naturally knew to avoid them. Soon after, the two slowly followed the cultivators who came in from behind and entered the darkness. Xiao Hua slowly walked and put on the camouflage cloth. He stopped at the side for a moment before walking out of the darkness. At this moment, several cultivators scattered around Xiao Hua followed him out. Apart from a foundation establishment old man who didn't conceal his cultivation and identity, the others were all wearing different camouflage cloth. Xiao Hua didn't know which one was Kaixuoxia, or perhaps Kaixuoxia had already come out. In front of Xiao Hua was a rather large hall. A dozen or so boys wearing the same clothes stood in different places with smiles on their faces. In the hall, there were several jade tables with some flowering spirit herbs and some spirit fruits. Many cultivators were scattered around the hall. Some were whispering, some were standing alone, looking at the ink and brushes hanging on the walls of the hall. There were even some who were holding spirit fruits or tea in their hands and lightly tasting them. In the four corners of the hall, there were 4 stairs that led straight to the second floor. Xiao Hua walked into the hall and met a boy in the second layer of qi refining. The boy had a clean face and red lips, looking very cute. The boy cupped his hands and smiled. "Welcome, Senior, to my auction. There are still some hours before the auction starts. Senior can rest in the hall for a while, or you can go to the second floor first. Today's auction will be held on the second floor." Xiao Hua slightly nodded and said, "I'll go to the second floor. Senior, this way please." The boy raised his hand and invited Xiao Hua to go to the nearest stairs. He said, "If Senior has something to bid for in the auction, now is the right time. On the second floor, my auction house has a senior martial brother to receive Senior." "Okay," Xiao Hua said and walked in the direction the boy pointed. The cultivator who was walking beside Xiao Hua didn't talk to the boy. At this moment, Xiao Hua walked in front of him. Xiao Hua followed that cultivator to go to the second floor. The second floor was different from the first floor. There was a slightly larger platform in the middle, floating high in the air. The entire second floor was divided into 2 parts by the platform. On the side where Xiao Hua was, there were a lot of chairs, all facing the platform. At this time, there were already some cultivators sitting on the chairs. On the other side of the platform, there were some small room-like lattices. Each lattice looked empty, but there was some empty brilliance that blocked Xiao Hua's gaze outside. The cultivator in front of Xiao Hua went to the second floor and walked straight to a row of young cultivators. These young cultivators were about 16 or 17 years old, and their cultivations were all in the 4th or 5th layer of qi refining. They wore clothes similar to the boy downstairs. They should be the senior martial brother of the boy downstairs. Senior, do you have something to bid for? Seeing the cultivator approaching, a Yinyuan City disciple cupped his hands and asked.
Yes.
The cultivator nodded and replied, Senior, please come this way. When the Yinyuan City disciple heard this, he raised his hand and invited the cultivator to a nearby entrance. Seeing the cultivator and the Yinyuan City disciple enter the entrance, Xiao Hua rubbed his chin and thought for a moment. But after thinking about it, he couldn't bear to part with any of the items in the space. Without hesitation, he picked up a chair in the corner of the hall and quietly sat down. Xiao Hua closed his eyes and did not speak. After about the time it took to finish a meal, the sound of footsteps gradually rang out around him. The chairs around him were all occupied. In the entire hall, other than the sound of footsteps and the welcoming words of the Yinyuan City disciples, everything else was quiet and there was no noise at all. Pop, pop, pop. A burst of crisp sounds, as if some bamboos were being squashed, followed by a burst of ethereal music that echoed throughout the hall. Xiao Hua knew that the auction had begun. When he opened his eyes, he saw that in the center of the stage, a milky white brilliance was gradually emitting from the tall platform. It was like a layer of clouds that slowly rolled upwards. When it covered the entire top of the stage, it suddenly dissipated in all directions, along with the resounding music. When the milky white brilliance dissipated, a thin and tall old man wearing a Taoist robe appeared on the stage. The old man's cultivation was roughly at the early stage of the late stage. His face was thin, and his long beard was a bit white. His 2 eyebrows drooped down from the corners of his eyes and seemed to be much longer than an ordinary person's. The green Taoist robe on his body was indescribably fitting. The old man's figure appeared on the high platform. He immediately smiled at the people below the stage and the independent seats across from Xiao Hua. He clasped his hands and said, I'm Enchantment. I'm the ruler of today's auction. Welcome, fellow cultivators, to my treasure auction pavilion to participate in the auction. At this moment, the music had already faded. The entire hall became even quieter. Only the old man's voice echoed in the hall. As you all know, the auction of the treasure auction pavilion is held every month. Thank you for your generosity in sending your treasures to the treasure auction pavilion. This time, there will be many treasures that you have never thought of appearing in the auction pavilion. Of course, before the auction begins, on behalf of my treasure auction pavilion, I would like to thank the Utopia faction, the Qiqiao sect, and the Xuanyan school. I would like to thank everyone for coming. And Chengma mentioned the names of many sects and families. At the beginning, he slightly tilted his body. It was obvious that he was speaking to the individual seats. At the end, he spoke to Xiao Hua and the other ordinary cultivators. Fellow cultivator, let's start quickly. I can't wait any longer. A loud voice came from Xiao Hua's side. This voice was very abrupt in the hall. Xiao Hua turned his head and saw a fat cultivator sitting there lazily. He didn't hide his cultivation level. Ha, 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 fellow cultivator Zhang. You are really impatient. Every time, you are the first to win. I just don't know. Will you be able to get what you want today? And Cheng Mo didn't seem to be angry. He clapped his hands, and a beautiful woman appeared on the stage with a jade plate in her hands. The jade plate in the woman's hands was covered with a layer of silk, and no one could see what was on it. The woman walked in front of Enchengma. The jade plate floated in the air. She took a few steps back and stood still. All right, said Enchengma with a smile. Thanks to fellow Taoist Zhang's urging, I'm going to take out the first item for this auction. He waved his hand, causing the silk cloth to fly up into the air, revealing the item on the jade plate. There was a fist-sized stone in the jade plate. Under the moonlight in the hall, it was faintly transparent. It looked very strange. and Chengma picked up the stone and spun it a few times under the moonlight. He smiled and said, "This is the spatial stone. It is an extremely rare material for refining tools. It is said that when refining tools, the spatial stone can reduce the weight of the tool. It is as light as a feather. As for whether or not it has any other uses, I can't say. I'm sure that all the tool refiners here have their own opinions. Well, a fellow cultivator asked us to bid for this item. The starting price is 10 mid-grade spirit stones." And Chengma finished speaking and looked at the fat cultivator. "Fellow cultivator Zhang, this is a material for refining tools. I'm sure you won't be interested in it." "It's not that I'm not interested in it, fellow Daoistan. It's just that the materials used to refine tools usually cost 3 to 5 mid-grade spirit stones. This space-time stone is so much more expensive. I'm still reluctant to part with a mid-grade spirit stone," Zhang Daoist said with a smile. Ha ha ha. When the others heard this, they all laughed. The atmosphere in the hall became very lively. "Since this is the first item of the auction, I will bid 10 mid-grade spirit stones." A cultivator on Xiao Hua's left raised his hand and shouted. He didn't hide his identity. Good, as expected of a fellow cultivator who knows his stuff. And Chengma praised and asked, "Is there anyone else who wants to bid? 1 mid-grade spirit stone each time." And Cheng Mo's words fell, but no one responded. Xiao Hua had bought so many pills the day before yesterday, but he had only spent 30 or so mid-grade spirit stones. These things were only used for refining tools. Who would want to buy them? In the end, even after Chengma shouted twice, no one answered. Just as Chengma was about to say, "Since no one wants to bid then," a low voice sounded, "I bid 11 mid-grade spirit stones." And Chengma looked up and saw a cultivator in a camouflage robe raise his hand. All right, this fellow Taoist has a discerning eye. He has offered 11 mid-grade spirit stones. Is there anyone willing to offer a higher price? That fellow cultivator just now. Doesn't he want to bid another mid-grade spirit stone? The cultivator waved his hand and said, "Fellow cultivatorin, I was just throwing a brick to attract more jade. Since a jade has been thrown out, I'd better get out of here." Ha ha ha. Another round of laughter, and Chengma was very satisfied. Although the spatial stone hadn't been auctioned many times, the atmosphere of the auction had been stirred up. It would be very beneficial for the auction later. Good. If no one else wants to bid, this spatial stone is yours. The hall fell silent. Pa? And Chengma clapped his hands and shouted, "Congratulations, fellow cultivator. This spatial stone is yours." After he said that, the woman standing next to him walked up and held the jade plate in her hand. This cultivator was none other than Xiao Hua, who was participating in the auction for the first time. -5. Chapter 1434. The woman walked in front of Xiao Hua with the jade plate in her hand. She raised her hands, and the spatial stone appeared in front of Xiao Hua's eyes. This was Xiao Hua's first time participating in an auction. Of course, it was his first time bidding. He just thought it was fun and wanted to try something new. He didn't expect to actually win this spatial stone. Seeing that the woman had brought the Void Meng stone over, he knew that she wanted him to pay the spirit stones. Thus, he patted his storage pouch and took out 11 mid-grade spirit stones. He placed them on a jade plate before holding the Void Meng stone in his hand. Sure enough, the spatial stone was very light, almost as if it was weightless. Through the spatial stone, Xiao Hua could almost see the woman nodding at him before walking away. On the high platform, and Chengma continued, "The spatial stone has been sold. Next up is another material used for refining tools. This material is black gold." Following in Chengma's voice, another woman wearing the same clothes appeared on the high platform. She was also holding a jade plate covered in silk. Black gold is a common material used to refine tools. It can strengthen the tool. This piece of black gold is different from normal black gold. It is more delicate and harder. And Chengma gave a simple introduction of the black gold. Finally, he said, "This piece of black gold is the same as the spatial stone. The bidding starts at 10 middle-grade spirit stones. Each bid will increase by 1 middle-grade spirit stone." Spatial stone was useless in refining many magic tools, but black gold was different. The harder a magic tool was, the more magic power it could contain, and the more power it could unleash. This was something that all magic tool refiners knew. Thus, as soon as Enchantment finished speaking, a cultivator in camouflage robes shouted, "I bid 12 mid-grade spirit stones." 13. 15. After a few bids, the price of the black gold had already reached 18 pieces. This black gold is so valuable? Xiao Hua was dumbfounded. He remembered that when he bought a piece of black gold, he only paid 3 middle-grade spirit stones. This piece of black gold was 6 times the price of his piece. When the price reached 18 pieces, no one else dared to bid any higher. And Cheng Yimou clapped his hands, indicating that the black gold belonged to the cultivator who had bid at the beginning. Soon after, there were all kinds of different refining materials, and there were also different prices and bids. The cultivators were all people who knew their stuff, and all the rare and commonly used materials had high prices. For example, some materials with very few uses like silk coiling gold and wild alfalfa stone had extremely low prices, and there were even some that no one bid at all. This made Xiao Hua extremely happy. This guy loved to be cheap the most, and he also had an indescribable hobby. He liked to collect these things that he didn't need for the time being, but might be useful in the future. Therefore, Xiao Hua took all the materials that no one cared about with a smile. This made Enchantment of the treasure auction pavilion secretly happy. Usually, no one would bid for these materials, and they could only take them back in the end. But this time, there was a strange cultivator like Xiao Hua who bought them all. This made Enchantment wonder if this guy was arranged by the city lord to be a front. After the bidding for refining materials, it was time to bid for spirit herbs. 100-year-old blackwood was offered for 1 middle-grade spirit stone, but because this blackwood was the main ingredient of the marrow-cleansing pill, it was bid for 30 middle-grade spirit stones by the cultivators. Strange, I remember that this 100-year-old spirit herb was only sold for 1 middle-grade spirit stone in Jinghua City. How could it be sold for 30 middle-grade spirit stones in Yinyuan City? But soon, he saw the cultivator in front of him who'd won the blackwood very carefully put the spirit grass into his storage pouch. Xiao Hua immediately came to a realization. The Centennial Life's main ingredient might be a middle-grade spirit stone, but it's always been rarely seen in e.g. I wandered around Jinghua City for a long time, and I only saw spirit herbs that were a few decades old. As for those that were older, they were all used to refine blood-replenishing pills and cleansing pills. Where have I seen spirit herbs that are used to refine marrow-cleansing pills? That's right. The price of 1 middle-grade spirit stone is the price of income and is not the price of selling it to cultivators. A blackwood, another blackwood, and other ingredients. If a high-level alchemist can refine a cauldron of 36 marrow-cleansing pills, 1 marrow-cleansing pill costs 10 to 20 middle-grade spirit stones, then 36 marrow-cleansing pills can be sold for at least 360 middle-grade spirit stones. The alchemist will definitely make a profit. According to the market price of E.G. City, a 1,000-year-old spirit herb costs 100 upper-grade spirit stones. The exquisite grass in ice space is probably 1,000-year-old. I wonder how many spirit stones it can be sold for if I take it out to bid? Xiao Hua was a little proud. Afterwards, there were many more spiritual grasses. Some were 100 years old, some were 200 years old, and in the end, there was even a yellow nightmare grass that was 500 years old. All of them were bid at an astonishing price. Xiao Hua was not interested in any of these spiritual grasses. Moreover, it was not his turn to bid for them. They were all fought over by other cultivators. All right, everyone, there is only one spirit herb left in this auction, and it will be over. And Chengma's face was flushed. He clapped his hands and said with a smile, "This last spirit herb is a little strange. It is not a spirit herb that is commonly seen in the Xiaoyu continent. The alchemists of Yinyuan City have also searched through ancient records for a long time, but they could not find its origin. Therefore, I will take it out last." As he said this, a woman still brought up a jade plate. When Chengma removed the silk cloth from the jade plate, everyone was stunned. On the jade plate, there was a withered willow branch. On the willow branch, there were 9 willow leaves, all of which were withered and yellow. Fellowin, isn't this a willow branch? A cultivator broke the silence in the hall, and asked curiously, "Fellow Taoist, good question." And Chengma clapped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist, do you think my treasure auction pavilion will mistake a willow branch for something else?" That cultivator was speechless. "This spirit herb, because my treasure auction pavilion cannot provide a name, then according to this fellow Taoist, we will call it a willow branch." Boom! Everyone laughed loudly. And Chengma shouted again, "This willow branch. The lowest bid is 50 high-grade spirit stones. Every increase is 10 high-grade spirit stones." Ah? 50 high-grade spirit stones? Everyone was shocked. After all, the 500-year-old yellow grass was only bid for 100 high-grade spirit stones. This unremarkable willow branch, which could even be said to be dying, was actually bid for 50 high-grade spirit stones. Only 50 high-grade spirit stones, which fellow Taoist is willing to pay. And Chengma was not nervous at all and only shouted loudly. Xiaohua looked from afar and did not frown. He also could not find any clues about this willow branch, but Chengma clearly said that this spirit herb did not seem to be from the Xiaoyu continent. Could it be an item from the devil realm? Xiaohua suddenly thought. But if it is an item from the devil realm, how can it survive on the Xiaoyu continent? Is it destined to wither and die? Maybe I can raise it in my space. In that case, I can see what this willow branch is. 50 high-grade spirit stones is not a small number. Why would I buy this thing for no reason? Xiaohua was hesitant again. At this moment, a voice rang out from one of the small houses that had been silent all this time. Xuanyan School offers 60 high-grade spirit stones. Ah, Xuanyan School? 60 high-grade spirit stones? Everyone was in an uproar. Many cultivators who did not hide their identity began to whisper. Good. The fellow Taoist from Xuanyan School bids 60 high-grade spirit stones. Is there anyone else who would like to bid higher? If not, this willow branch belongs to Xuanyan School. And Chengma immediately shouted. The room was silent. Everyone unconsciously turned their heads slightly, wanting to see if there was really someone who would bid higher spirit stones. Is there no one? If no one else bids, this willow branch will be given to. Without waiting for Chengma to finish, Xiaohua raised his hand. 70 high-grade spirit stones. 80. The disciple from Xuanyan School coldly shouted without hesitation. Humph, Xiaohua secretly sneered in his heart. If it was someone else, since I don't know what this willow branch is, I will naturally bear with it. But if Xuanyan School wants it, I also want it. Even if I can't win against you in the end, I will make you spin more spirit stones. Xiaohua seemed to remember the anger he received in front of the disciple from Xuanyan School. 90. Xiaohua raised his hand and said 100. The disciple from Xuanyan School's tone was still cold. 110. Finally, Xiaohua continued to bid for the willow branch, 220 high-grade spirit stones. This round of inexplicable bidding not only stunned the crowd of cultivators, but even Chengma, who was on the high platform, opened his eyes wide and was at a loss. This was obviously beyond his expectations. Ha ha ha, good. Since fellow Taoist likes this willow branch so much, I will let you have it. The disciple from Xuanyan School suddenly laughed loudly. What? Xiaohua was stunned. He suddenly felt like he was being teased. Could it be? I tried to steal a chicken but ended up losing the rice used to lure it. Instead, I was schemed against? But as the disciple from Xuanyan School withdrew, and Chengma immediately clapped his hands and said, This fellow Taoist is wise, to be able to bid such a high price for the willow branch. Congratulations. Ha ha ha. As Chengma's voice fell, all the cultivators in the field also laughed loudly, making Xiaohua's face turn red. Fortunately, the mystic grass blocked him. Otherwise, he would have to find a hole and burrow into the ground. The woman gave the willow branch to Xiaohua. Xiaohua didn't even look at it and threw it into the space, casually inserting it into a place. Well, under the enthusiasm of fellow Taoists, the spirit herbs have been bid for. Next are some talismans and talisman crafting materials. And Chengma said with a smile, the first talisman is the guiding lightning talisman. As he spoke, he opened the jade plate that the woman sent over. Inside the jade plate was a shiny object, completely different from the ordinary yellow talismans. Looking at the appearance of the talisman, it was exactly the same as the Yunqing talisman on Li Zhongbao's head. -5. Chapter 1435. I believe that many fellow Taoists are familiar with the thunder palm technique. I don't think I need to explain how powerful it is. And Chengma smiled and said, the thunder summoning technique is able to attract the divine lightning from the horizon. That kind of heavenly power. TSK. Just thinking about it makes I tremble with fear. Of course, this thunder summoning technique has always been a secret technique passed down by some sections. Only seniors with profound cultivation can use it, and when using it, they need to use extremely powerful magic treasures. The thunder summoning talisman is made by using the thunder summoning technique to refine the thunder summoning talisman. The minimum requirement to refine the thunder summoning talisman is a 4th grade thunder beast. As for the blood essence of the thunder summoning talisman, it also needs to be a 2nd grade flying crane. Hiss. Hearing this, Xiaohua sucked in a breath of cold air. Not to mention the talisman crafting technique used to refine the thunder summoning talisman. Just the blood essence of the spirit beast and the blood essence of the thunder summoning talisman were beyond Xiaohua's imagination. The price of this thunder summoning talisman was definitely not low. Sure enough, after Chengma explained, he reported the price of the thunder summoning talisman. Although this thunder summoning talisman can be used repeatedly, the conditions for using it are quite harsh. The user must be at the foundation establishment stage or above, so fellow Taoists in the qi condensation stage should not consider it for the time being. The price of this thunder summoning talisman is 10 high-grade spirit stones. 15. Before Chengma's voice fell, a voice rang out from the small room. 20 high-grade spirit stones. Right in front of Xiaohua, near the high platform, another cultivator added without hesitation. 25. It would appear that this lightning guiding talisman was very rare. Additionally, it was also very powerful. Many of the cultivators who had concealed their cultivation bases were bidding for it. In just a short moment, the price had risen to 60 high-grade spirit stones. At that moment, only 2 cultivators who were seated in separate rooms remained in the auction hall. One of them was dressed like a cultivator from the 7 Skills sect. He was at the late stage of the foundation establishment realm. His hair and beard were all white, his body was large, and there was a hint of anger on his face. The other cultivator was dressed like a cultivator from the Splendid Flower sect. He was also at the late stage of the foundation establishment realm. His hair and beard were all white, but he was skinny and had some strange black spots on his face. The cultivator from the 7 Skills sect looked at Chengma excitedly shouting at the other cultivators and frowned. He then looked at the restrictions on the walls and said, "Fellow Taoist Jiang, I have some other uses for this lightning summoning talisman. If fellow Taoist isn't in a hurry to use it, why don't you let me have it? If I have other things later, I'll let fellow Taoist have it. How about it?" When the cultivator from the Splendid Flowers sect heard this, he raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "Okay, since fellow Taoist he has a use for it, then why not let fellow Taoist have it?" "Many thanks, fellow Taoist Jiang." Fellow Taoist he from the 7 Skills sect said with a smile. "Ah, you can do that?" Xiaohua was stunned when he heard this from outside. And Chengma didn't find it strange. There were restrictions on the individual rooms. Even golden core cultivators couldn't privately communicate with each other. If they were to talk, they could only be heard by everyone in the room. Okay, the lightning summoning talisman for 60 high-grade spirit stones goes to fellow Taoist he from the 7 Skills sect. And Chengma clapped his hands and a woman brought the lightning summoning talisman into the room of the 7 Skills sect. Then there were a few more rare talismans. Unfortunately, none of them were the invisibility talismans that Xiaohua wanted. In addition, those talismans required foundation establishment cultivators to use. Therefore, most of the talismans were won by the cultivators in the individual rooms. There were also a few cultivators who hid their cultivation. Okay, everyone, the next item to be auctioned is what everyone wants to see, and that is medicinal pills. And Chengma's face showed a trace of red light, and he said loudly, "Medicinal pills that can increase one's cultivation are rare in E-City and E-City. However, in the auction, they are not rare. However, today, to be able to appear in large quantities, to be honest, even I have never seen such a thing. Wow! The cultivators who didn't hide their cultivation couldn't help but whisper in each other's ears. Even more cultivators stretched their necks to look at the stage. Clap, clap, and Chengma clapped his hands and a woman brought out more than 10 jade bottles. And Chengma smiled and said, "Do you see this? Fellow Taoists, this is the famous Qing pill in the country of Shi. It is most useful for cultivators in the third and fourth level of Qi refining. If any foundation establishment cultivator has a junior in the lower level of Qi refining, you should consider it. After all, it is rare to see so many Qing pills. There are a total of 15 jade bottles here. Each bottle contains 10 Qing pills. Every time a jade bottle is bid, the price is 80 mid-grade spirit stones. Every time the price is increased by 10 mid-grade spirit stones, 100 mid-grade spirit stones. Similarly, without waiting for Chengma to finish speaking, a cultivator immediately raised his hand and shouted, 100 mid-grade spirit stones? Xiao Hua, who was at the end of the line, was stunned again. Of course, there were exactly 150 Qing pills. Needless to say, these were the pills that Xiao Hua gave to Shui the day before yesterday. He paid 5 mid-grade spirit stones for each pill. This bottle of 10 Qing pills was only worth 50 mid-grade spirit stones. This cultivator had just started the auction, and he had already bid such a high price. Presumably, Shui, who was sitting somewhere, was already bursting with joy. Sure enough, the other cultivators were also stunned. After Chengma shouted a few times, no one bid. That cultivator contentedly put the bottle of Qing pills into his bag. After that, the other 9 bottles of Qing pills were also bid at a high price. The highest price was 150 mid-grade spirit stones, while the lowest was 110 mid-grade spirit stones. In comparison, the cultivator who made the first bid used the least amount of mid-grade spirit stones. So that's how it is. Xiao Hua slowly saw through the situation and said, that Qing pill originally had a market price of 5 mid-grade spirit stones. Shui asked the treasure auction pavilion to bid 8 mid-grade spirit stones, which was already a lot higher. Furthermore, this cultivator gave out 10 mid-grade spirit stones all at once. Other people would probably still hesitate, and there were still 9 bottles of pills after that. In the end, this cultivator got a bargain. Actually, the one who got the best end of the deal is Shui. She earned more than 800 mid-grade spirit stones in one go. It's more than what she paid me. That's not right. Shui is the biggest winner? The biggest winner is probably the Imperial Elixir School. Xiao Hua suddenly came to a realization. The pills that the Imperial Elixir School is going to offer today are the soul-nurturing pills and marrow-cleansing pills. Their quality and effects are much better than the clear breeze pills. I finally understand now. The Imperial Elixir School gave me the clear breeze pills and clean lotus pills. It's impossible for these pills to earn too many spirit stones in the first place. If I sent these pills to the auction house like Shui did, I could only push the price of the soul-nurturing pills and marrow-cleansing pills even higher. Just as Xiao Hua was thinking, and Chengma gestured with his hand and said with a smile, "Everyone, don't be anxious. These Qing pills are just appetizers. The next item is the real deal. Marrow-cleansing pill. 1,000 pills, which is also 10 pills per bottle. Each bottle costs 2 high-grade spirit stones. Every bid is 10 mid-grade spirit stones. 250 mid-grade spirit stones." A cultivator shouted. The marrow-cleansing pill could be used by cultivators from the 3rd to the 8th level of Qi refinement. It was much better than the Qing pills. 280 mid-grade spirit stones. The atmosphere in the hall immediately livened up. Looking at the somewhat crazy cultivators around him, Xiao Hua sat quietly on his chair and shook his head slightly. There are good things in this auction, but if you don't have enough spirit stones, there's really no need to come. In the time it took to eat a meal, 100 bottles of marrow-cleansing pills were won by 100 cultivators at an average price of 5 high-grade spirit stones per bottle. Good. 500 high-grade spirit stones. Xiao Hua secretly clicked his tongue. No wonder. Shopkeeper Liu of the Imperial Pill School could easily sell low-grade medicinal pills to me. They really don't care. In a separate room, shopkeeper Lu of the Imperial Pill School was frowning. He turned his head and asked the disciple beside him, "Did you see Xiao Hua come to the treasure auction pavilion with a female cultivator?" Yes, this disciple saw it with his own eyes. That female cultivator isn't Xue Xue? Definitely not. This disciple has long been familiar with Xue Xue's appearance. That's strange. Those 150 Qingyi pills must have been obtained by Xue Xue from Xiao Hua. But where are Xiao Hua's Qingyi pills? And there are so many clean lotus pills. Why didn't he take them out to bid? Could it be I misjudged him? There's something wrong with this Xiao Hua after all? Reporting to shopkeeper, even if there's something wrong with this Xiao Hua, what kind of storm can those Qingyi pills and clean lotus pills cause? At most, they'll just create more low-level cultivators, so that they won't have the chance to peak at the higher levels. What do you know? Shopkeeper Lu berated. Those are 800 clean lotus pills. If each cultivator takes 10 pills, there will be 80 low-level cultivators who can break through their bottlenecks. Even if there are 80 third-level qi refining cultivators, they still can't be underestimated. Moreover, this guy Xiao Hua seems to be a loose cultivator. A few years ago, the heaven-forsaken loose cultivator organization was like a rainbow. I heard that a few years ago, they lost a feather on the Thousand Zhang Peak and many loose cultivators died. Now, they have disappeared without a trace. But what if this Xiao Hua is a loose cultivator abandoned by heaven-forsaken? Doesn't that mean heaven-forsaken can rise from the ashes again? Those loose cultivators are as hateful as locusts, but they can't be underestimated. The disciple was stunned. He bowed and said, "This disciple is stupid. This disciple didn't think so much." "Humph, of course you didn't think so much." Shopkeeper Lu snorted and said, "Go to the treasure auction pavilion and send some people to keep an eye on Xiao Hua's whereabouts. Find out who he is. Those 800 clean lotus pills can't be eaten by himself like he's chewing beans." "Yes, this disciple will arrange it right away." The disciple bowed and left. What shopkeeper Lu didn't know was that those 800 clean lotus pills, Xiao Hua really did want to take them himself. In the past 2 days, he had been taking clean lotus pills in the inn. The effect was much better than the Qingyi pills. According to Xiao Hua's estimation, from the beginning of the 4th level to the 5th level of qi refining, these 800 clean lotus pills should be enough. Seeing that the bidding for the marrow-cleansing pill was over, and Chengma clapped his hands again and shouted, "Fellow Taoists who are at the higher levels of qi refining must have been looking forward to it. The next item to be auctioned is exactly what fellow Taoists are looking forward to, the Peiyuan pill. -5. Chapter 1436. Peiyuan pill? Immediately, some cultivators cried out in surprise. It wasn't that the Peiyuan pill hadn't appeared in the auction before, but after seeing the number of marrow-cleansing pills, all the cultivators understood that the Peiyuan pill couldn't be less. The number was the only reason they cried out in surprise. Sure enough, and Chengma clapped his hands and laughed. "I thought that everyone would be surprised. This time, the number of Peiyuan pill isn't small. I'm sure it will satisfy everyone's needs." As he spoke, several women brought up several jade plates. At this time, a few impatient cultivators stood up, wanting to see the number of jade bottles. This time, there are 800 Peiyuan pill divided into 160 jade bottles. There are 5 pills in each bottle, and each bottle is worth 4 high-grade spirit stones. Each increment is 50 mid-grade spirit stones. 5 high-grade spirit stones. A cultivator had already started to raise the price. Damn, they're all crazy. Seeing the cultivators start to raise the price, the corner of Xiao Hua's mouth unconsciously twitched. However, he also knew that the Peiyuan pill was useful for cultivators at the 4th stage of qi refining. Didn't Zhang Qingxiao and the others break through after taking the Peiyuan pill? This kind of pill, it was worth it no matter how many spirit stones it cost. Sure enough, as Xiao Hua had expected, a bottle of 5 essence-nurturing pills, with an average price of 11 high-grade spirit stones, was successfully bid for all of them. Each Peiyuan pill was worth 2 high-grade spirit stones. Hee. In the small room, shopkeeper Lu of the Imperial Pill School was laughing so hard that he couldn't close his mouth. This was almost 2 top-grade spirit stones. For a sect that wasn't very big and the quality of the Peiyuan pills wasn't very good, it was definitely a very worthwhile transaction. In another small room, the old man who bid against Xiaohua just now frowned. He turned to a disciple beside him and said, "Go ask the treasure auction pavilion. Which sect is this? How could they bid for so many Peiyuan pill? What are their intentions?" "This," a disciple next to him said awkwardly, "I'm afraid it's a bit difficult. This is the rule of the treasure auction pavilion. We never reveal these secrets. This is also the reason why the treasure auction pavilion is so famous." What secrets? In front of my Xuanyan school, Yinyuan City has no secrets. As long as there are enough benefits, there are no absolute secrets. Yes, disciple will. Before the disciple could bow and leave, and Cheng Mo's voice sounded again, causing the cultivators and disciples of Xuanyan school to be shocked and almost jumped out. And Cheng Ma shouted, "It's time for the auction to reach its climax. What's after the Peiyuan pill? Fellow Taoists, do you know about it?" "Foundation Establishment Pill." A cultivator stood up and shouted, "Haha, that's exactly the case. The next item to be auctioned is 20 Foundation Establishment Pills." It's really a Foundation Establishment Pill." The standing cultivator was stunned. The cultivators of Xuanyan School and the hut were also stunned. The cultivators from the Seven Skills sect and the Magnificent Flower sect were stunned. All the cultivators in the auction hall were stunned. 20 Foundation Establishment Pills. That means 20 Foundation Establishment cultivators. Usually, the treasure auction pavilion would only have 1 or 2 of them appear. There had never been so many of them. With a wong sound, the entire auction hall boiled over. Many people stood up without caring about etiquette. Go quickly. See which sect it is." The cultivators of Xuanyan School roared. This is simply not putting my Xuanyan School in their eyes. Of course, Xuanyan School's Foundation Establishment Pill is a famous pill in the cultivation world of the country of Xi. Most of the Foundation Establishment Pills that appear in the auction hall are controlled by Xuanyan School. With so many Foundation Establishment Pills appearing, not only will it affect Xuanyan School's reputation, but it will also affect the balance of power between the various sects. The cultivators of Xuanyan School seem to have already seen that after the auction, the Seven Skills sect and the Magnificent Flower sect would criticize Xuanyan School. "Just 20 Foundation Establishment Pills, and you're already like this." Xiaohua looked at everyone's appearance and only curled his lips. If you knew that the number of Foundation Establishment Pills in the eye space is more than this, what would you do? Thinking of this, Xiaohua suddenly thought, "That's right. Why would Qing Fengmin want so many Foundation Establishment Pills? He himself is only at the 5th or 6th level of Qi refining, and he's also a demon. He doesn't need Foundation Establishment Pills, that's not right. Since he can cultivate to the 5th level of Qi refining, he can also cultivate to the Foundation Establishment stage, and even form a golden core. These Foundation Establishment Pills are naturally useful, but how could he use so many of them? Could it be that Qing Fengmin's situation is the same as mine? But that's still not right. This guy is a demon. Although the blood shadow technique is powerful, it can't directly cultivate my cultivation world's techniques. AI, forget it. This guy has already been killed. Why should I care about him?" While Xiaohua was thinking, the bidding for the Foundation Establishment Pills had already started. Sure enough, as everyone expected, the price of 1 Foundation Establishment Pill had already reached 10 top-grade spirit stones. Moreover, there were still people slowly increasing the price. After all, this was a chance to enter the Foundation Establishment stage. No one would easily give it up. "Fellow Taoistan." At this time, someone stood up and asked, "I don't have enough spirit stones, but in my storage bag, there are magic tools and spirit herbs that are comparable to top-grade spirit stones. Would it be possible to exchange them?" Hearing this, Cheng Ma smiled and shook his head. "Sorry. The cultivator who entrusted this auction to us said very clearly that they only want spirit stones and nothing else." "Ah, why only spirit stones? Magic tools and spirit herbs. Aren't they all very good?" The cultivator was unwilling to give up and asked, "This? I don't know." And Cheng Ma shook his head again. After that cultivator sat down, The first Foundation Establishment pill was won by a disguised cultivator at the price of 12 top-grade spirit stones. What was even more surprising was that the 7 Skills sect, Shanghua sect, and Xuanyan school also joined in the bidding. Of course, Xuanyan school didn't lack Foundation Establishment pills. What he wanted to do was to tell others that this Foundation Establishment pill wasn't offered by his Xuanyan school. The result was even more puzzling. The 3 great sects didn't win any more Foundation Establishment pills. Only 3 of the pills were taken by each of them, while the other 16 pills were taken by 10 rich and overbearing cultivators. One of the cultivators actually won 4 pills, and the remaining Foundation Establishment pills were sold for an average of 15 top-grade spirit stones each. That cultivator actually took out 60 top-grade spirit stones. This was really shocking. However, these 10 cultivators were all hiding their cultivation, so no one knew who they were. Who would carry 60 top-grade spirit stones with them? Xiaohua was also dumbfounded. Based on the items that the treasure auction pavilion had just bid for and the performance of the cultivators present, Xiaohua understood that a top-grade spirit stone could be used to bid for a lot of things in the auction. It was precisely because of this that no one would bring too many top-grade spirit stones. Yet this cultivator actually, I know. Xiaohua suddenly realized. This cultivator is probably related to Xue. But, since he's related, why would Xue take out some clear breeze pills from me to bid for some mid-grade spirit stones? Xiaohua was puzzled. While Xiaohua was pondering, the auction was still proceeding in an orderly manner. Because they had just gone through the climax of the Foundation Establishment pills, the following few magic tools, even low-grade magic tools, were unable to arouse the interest of the cultivators present. Several magic tools that seemed somewhat ordinary, unexpectedly, no one bid for them. And with Xiaohua's current cultivation, he didn't have any use for these things. Towards these magic tools that could easily be sold for top-grade spirit stones, he was even less interested. Thus, he didn't raise any hand. Time slowly passed by, and when a magical treasure was taken back by the auction pavilion, and Chengma clapped his hands, and a dozen women brought out some jade plates. He said, "Fellow cultivators, before we bid for the last item of this auction, let's take out the items that we didn't bid for in the previous auctions. Let's see if anyone is interested. These items are priced at 10 mid-grade spirit stones each, and each increment is 1 mid-grade spirit stone." After he finished speaking, and Chengma waved his hand, and the silk on the jade plates were lifted, revealing the items inside. When Xiaohua heard that they were items that weren't sold in the previous auctions, his heart had already lost interest. Seeing the dozen jade plates casually rotating around the high platform, he didn't look carefully. At this time, the atmosphere in the hall began to gradually become lively. Many cultivators also stood up and came to the side of the high platform. When they saw something suitable, they took out spirit stones from their storage bags and began to exchange. The items inside these dozen jade plates were very complicated. There were strange yellow talismans, broken magic tools, and some inexplicable things. This is a soul-absorbing talisman? Xiaohua's eyes inadvertently swept over and saw a shabby yellow talisman that was very similar to the one used by Cheng Ming. Whoosh! Xiaohua stood up from his chair and wanted to take the soul-assimilating talisman. Unfortunately, just as he took 2 steps forward, a cultivator standing next to the high platform pointed his finger, and the soul-assimilating talisman immediately fell into his hand. The cultivator took out 10 mid-grade spirit stones and placed them on the jade plate. Then he turned around and left. Xiaohua stretched out his hand and opened his mouth, but he didn't know how to stop the cultivator. Although Chengma said that they could bid, the cultivators in front of him didn't have the intention to bid at all. When they saw something that they liked, they immediately took out their spirit stones and left. Why is that? Xiaohua habitually scratched his head and prepared to go back. Coincidentally, at this time, a jade plate flew to the place where the soul-absorbing talisman was. Xiaohua's eyes fell on it, and he couldn't help but feel happy. On the jade plate, there were 3 pieces of gold foil. It looked very similar to the gold foil in Xiaohua's space. Come on, this is it. I didn't come here in vain. Xiaohua smiled and quickly walked over. He stretched out his hand and put the jade plate into the jade plate. But when he took out the mid-grade spirit stones, a voice sounded next to him, "Fellow Taoist, I also want this gold foil. -5. Chapter 1437. Damn it, Xiaohua almost cursed it out loud. Just now, there was a soul-absorbing talisman, but he didn't get it. Now, he saw the 3 gold sheets that no one wanted. He just got them in his hand, and before he could even warm them up, someone else also wanted them. Like this, wouldn't he have to bid again? Was it because his character was bad? Or was it because the guy next to him didn't know what was good for him? Xiaohua raised his head and glanced at the cultivator who just spoke. That cultivator didn't hide his cultivation. He was only 15 or 16 years old, and his cultivation was also very good. He was already at the 6th level of qi refining. He must be a disciple of some sect. However, looking at his somewhat uneasy expression, it seemed like it was his first time leaving the mountain. Just as Xiaohua was about to speak, an older cultivator next to the young cultivator raised his arm and poked the young cultivator's waist. He shouted in a low voice, "Shut up!" Then, he smiled at Xiaohua and nodded. He said, "Fellow Taoist, this junior brother of mine doesn't know the rules. Please don't blame him. Please don't blame him. You can just put away the gold sheets. Don't mind him." Xiaohua was delighted. He didn't answer and took out 10 mid-grade spirit stones from his storage bag. He threw them into the jade plate and then very nimbly put the gold sheets into his space. At this time, Xiaohua heard the young cultivator next to him ask in a low voice, "Senior brother, this gold sheet. I also want it. Didn't Senior say just now? If we both want it, we can bid. Why don't you let me bid?" "You don't know shit." The older cultivator also said in a low voice, "Didn't you hear Senior say that? These are all things that failed in bidding before. They are things that their treasure auction pavilion smashed into their hands. If you bid with others now, wouldn't it be letting the treasure auction pavilion take advantage of you? Letting others pay more spirit stones for nothing?" "But I'm also willing to pay more spirit stones." The young cultivator was very puzzled. "You can't pay more spirit stones. All the fellow Taoists participating in the auction have a tacit understanding. As long as it's something that failed in bidding before, the treasure auction pavilion will take it out again. Whoever sees it first will get it. Absolutely can't bid." The older cultivator raised his chin and said, "Look again. There are dozens of cultivators here. Which one of them is bidding against someone else? If you compete with others, not only will you embarrass our sect, but you will also offend many of our fellow cultivators. You can forget about traveling around Yinyuan City." The young cultivator looked left and right. It was just as his senior brother had said. No matter what it was, no matter how many cultivators were standing next to it, as long as a cultivator pointed his finger at the jade plate and caused it to stop, the people next to him would shift their gazes away and no longer look at the jade plate. "Yes, I understand," the young cultivator said in a low voice. "Hee. So there's actually such a rule." Xiaohua, who was at the side, heard everything clearly and secretly gave a thumbs up to this rule. Just as Xiaohua wanted to see what else was on the stage, his heart suddenly moved and he walked over to the 2 cultivators. Seeing Xiaohua coming over, the older cultivator frowned and quickly cupped his hands. "This, fellow Taoist, just now my junior brother didn't know the rules and offended you. Please forgive him." Xiaohua cupped his hands in return and smiled. "Fellow Taoist, don't think too much. I don't have any ill intentions, and I don't want to pursue your junior brother's rudeness. I just have something I want to ask." "Oh, what is it?" "Fellow Taoist, please speak." The older cultivator didn't let down his guard and looked at the many jade plates on the stage and asked in a low voice, "May I ask this fellow Taoist, why did you want these gold plates?" Xiaohua turned his head and asked the young cultivator, "This, when I was young, I occasionally obtained a gold plate that was similar to these gold plates. However, I couldn't figure out anything from that gold plate. So I wanted to put these gold plates together and see if I could comprehend something." The young cultivator's face reddened and he said in a low voice, "Oh, so it's like that." Xiaohua nodded and said, "I see. Fellow Taoist is also a person of fate." Then, Xiaohua turned his head and said to the older cultivator, "Fellow Taoist, I was the same as your junior brother. I also obtained a gold plate in my early years. However, after studying it for more than 10 years, I still didn't have any progress. Since your junior brother also has a gold plate, I won't beat around the bush. I wonder if your junior brother can exchange that gold plate for I?" This. The older cultivator frowned and turned his head to ask, "Junior brother, what do you think?" "Me? I." The young cultivator thought for a moment and said hesitantly, "I think that gold plate is a bit strange, but I also pondered about it for nearly 10 years. When the older cultivator saw this, he turned his head and asked, "Then, how many spirit stones is fellow Taoist prepared to use to exchange?" "Hee, this will depend on your junior brother's intentions." Xiaohua pushed the question back. Unexpectedly, the other party didn't take it and only smiled. "I understand what my junior brother means. I must first see fellow Taoist's sincerity." At this moment, the young cultivator pulled the older cultivator's sleeve and said, "Forget it, senior brother. We don't lack any spirit stones. I think the gold plate is a bit strange. I'd better keep it for myself." When Xiaohua heard this, he became somewhat anxious. He patted his hand and took out a jade bottle from his storage pouch. It was the bottle he obtained from Kai Yuxia's storage pouch. He handed it over and said, "Fellow Taoist, I have no use for this thing. Take it for exchange. Fellow Taoist, please see if this thing is suitable. If it's not, then I can't do anything." "What is it?" The older cultivator took it curiously and opened the jade bottle to take a look. His expression changed, but he didn't reveal any surprise. Then, he looked at Xiaohua and then at the jade bottle in his hand. After thinking for a moment, he whispered a few words into the young cultivator's ear. At first, the young cultivator was somewhat unwilling, but after listening for a while, he began to slightly nod his head. In the end, he took the jade bottle, looked at it again and again, smelled it again and again, then patted his storage pouch and took out a gold plate. He handed it to Xiaohua and said, "Senior, please accept it." And Xiaohua took it and looked it over. He smiled and said, "Then this old man thanks you." After saying this, he slightly cupped his hands and walked back to his chair. "Hee, 2 Peiyuan pills are equivalent to 4 high-grade spirit stones in this auction. For high-grade spirit stones for 1 gold plate, I don't know if I'm losing out or not." Xiaohua sat on the chair and thought with a smile, "But if I only take 1 Peiyuan pill, then as a senior brother, he may not open his mouth to speak." After the time it took to eat a meal, the jade plates on the high platform changed several times, but none of them were what Xiaohua wanted. The number of cultivators coming forward to watch also decreased. Finally, someone couldn't bear it anymore and shouted, "Fellow Taoist, and quickly take out the last item. I can't wait any longer. The things flying around here are all trash that other people don't want. Who would use spirit stones to exchange?" Hee, it seems that fellow Taoists are impatient. And Chengma clapped his hands and the jade plates on the high platform slowly fell down. A dozen or so women came forward to take them. Immediately after, a woman with a revealing figure and wearing very little slowly walked up the high platform. She held a small jade plate in her hand. The woman's round face and red lips made people's hearts itch. But, at this time, all the cultivators' eyes fell on the jade plate in her hand. The woman's good looks were rarely noticed by anyone. "Fellow Taoists, I have had the honor of being the manager of the treasure auction pavilion for about 40 years. And Chengma said with a smile, "In these 40 years, I don't know how many things I've bid for. Strange magical treasures, rare talismans, heaven-defying elixirs. I've bid for countless of them. Even if it's a rare basic cultivation technique, alchemy technique, artifact-making technique, and so on, this Taoist has seen them all before. But today's item is a little strange." And Chengma's words immediately aroused everyone's appetite. The laziness from before disappeared as everyone stretched their necks to look at the jade plate in the woman's hand. Unfortunately, both the silk and the jade plate had restrictions that isolated divine sense, so no one knew what was inside. However, looking at the appearance of the silk on the jade plate, there was an 80 to 90% chance that it was a cultivation technique. As for what kind of cultivation technique it was, only Enchantment could reveal it. Sure enough, Enchantment waved his hand and took the silk off the jade plate. They heard him say, "To tell you the truth, this is a book of basic cultivation techniques." Ah? Cultivation techniques? Basic cultivation techniques? Everyone was shocked. Previously, our treasure auction pavilion also bid for books of basic cultivation techniques, and more than once. But those cultivation techniques were either incomplete or only had low levels. None of them could be used to directly cultivate to the foundation establishment stage. What? A basic cultivation technique that can be used to cultivate to the foundation establishment stage? And Chungma's words were like a huge rock that was thrown into the water, disrupting the tranquility of the hall. Almost everyone stood up, and the shock and surprise on their faces were even greater than when they saw the dozens of foundation establishment pills. Yes, it is a complete cultivation technique that can be used to cultivate from the first level of Qi refining to the 12th level of Qi refining, and then to break through to the foundation establishment stage. And it's a set of earth attribute cultivation techniques that are suitable for most cultivators. Buzz. The noise was so loud that it almost overturned the auction hall. In a small room, the cultivators of Xuanyan School, Qiqiao sect, and Shanghua sect all had gloomy expressions. They lowered their heads to discuss, presumably to obtain this cultivation technique at all costs. Shopkeeper Liu of the Imperial Pill sect was even more delighted. He knew very well what this complete set of cultivation techniques meant. Obtaining this set of cultivation techniques meant that they could use it to cultivate to the foundation establishment stage. It also meant that they could establish their own sect. At the very least, they could establish a family of cultivators. Come to think of it, Kaizhuaxia's Kai clan and Luyang only had a cultivation technique that could allow one to cultivate up to the 10th layer of the Qi refining realm. Whoever obtained this cultivation technique would be able to create a clan even more powerful than the Kai clan. At this moment, Xiao Hua, who had been very calm until now, could no longer sit still. -5. Chapter 1438. That's because Xiao Hua didn't care about medicinal pills, talismans, magic tools, and magic treasures. However, Xiao Hua could not care about cultivation techniques. It had been almost 2 years since he left Yellow Flower Ridge. Hadn't he been looking for cultivation techniques all this time? Now that an opportunity had appeared before him, how could he not be tempted? Fellow cultivator, everyone shouted, "Is this cultivation technique real? What's its base price?" Hee, I don't know if this cultivation method is real or not, but I've instructed a fellow Taoist to place a restriction on this book. Only when a fellow Taoist wins the bid will that fellow Taoist be able to remove the restriction on the book. Fellow Taoist, please take a look. As for the base price of this cultivation technique, even I don't know. And Chengma stretched out his hand and picked up a yellow talisman from the booklet. This was left behind by the owner of this booklet. The base price of this booklet is recorded on it. Fellow cultivator, and could you stop the auction for an hour? I don't have enough spirit stones here. A cultivator suddenly shouted. That's right, let's stop for a moment and go get some spirit stones. Everyone came to a realization. Fellow cultivators, I'm very sorry, but the owner of this booklet doesn't want to make it public. If he doesn't win the bid this time, he'll take this booklet and leave Yinyuan City. I don't know when he'll return. Sigh. Everyone sighed. Only shopkeeper Liu from the Imperial Pill sect was overjoyed. The Imperial Alchemy School had the most supreme grade spirit stones in this auction. Xiao Hua, who was below the stage, felt a chill in his heart when he heard this. Of course, he did have some top-grade spirit stones in his space, but they were far less than the dozens of top-grade spirit stones in the Imperial Elixir School. Although he had a lot of foundation-building pills, they were not top-grade spirit stones. Sigh. I'm afraid there's no chance. Xiao Hua thought in annoyance. If I knew this would happen, I would have sold some foundation establishment pills and spirit herbs. Xiao Hua wasn't the only one regretting. Almost all the cultivators in the auction were filled with regret. They were all regretting that they didn't bring enough top-grade spirit stones. All right, I'm ready to reveal the base price. As Chengma spoke, He activated his mana, and the yellow talisman in his hand began to burn. An old voice rang out, "Fellow cultivators, this is the heavenly law's embodiment of Earth. It is an advanced Earth element cultivation technique that I came across by chance. From the beginning of the first level of the Qi refining stage to the peak of the Qi refining stage, there is a corresponding cultivation technique. It is very complete. I don't lack spirit stones, so the base price of this technique is a 100-year-old mother-child spirit fruit. Every increment of 10 years. Huh. When the old Chungma's voice disappeared, the entire auction hall was silent. Everyone was stunned by this strange method. In fact, it was not that there were no specific spiritual herbs or elixirs in this auction, but, most of the time, it would be some centuries-old spiritual herbs or some extremely rare spiritual herbs. Of course, in most cases, if there were no spiritual herbs, a large number of spiritual stones would be enough. After all, spiritual stones could be used to exchange for what one wanted. But this old Qingma didn't want spirit stones. He only wanted the mother-child spirit fruit. In this world, the mother-child spirit fruit grew in groups. If one wasn't plucked, the other mother-child spirit fruits wouldn't mature. Even if someone came across a mother-child spirit fruit or planted a mother-child spirit fruit, they would pluck it as soon as it matured. After all, the age of the mother-child spirit fruit didn't have much to do with the effect of the embryonic breathing pill. Who would wait for a ripe mother-child spirit fruit for 100 years? However, among the hundreds of cultivators in the auction hall, someone actually had a mother-child spirit fruit. A Qi refining level 8 cultivator jumped up and stammered, I have a mother-child spirit fruit." And Chungma saw this and laughed. "Fellow cultivator, you are really lucky. Is your mother-child spirit fruit 100-year-old? The cultivator's face was a little red. He scratched his head and said, "This mother-child spirit fruit was found by I 2 years ago. I plucked it as soon as it matured. I'm afraid it's not even 100 years old." "Haha, it's better than nothing. Fellow cultivator, please come up. Let's see if anyone else has a mother-child spirit fruit. This poor Taoist also has one here." As he spoke, the other cultivator also stood up and said, "Please, fellow cultivator, come up too. Let's see who has the oldest mother-child spirit fruit." "Fellow cultivator, I have a 120-year-old mother-child spirit fruit." "These fellow cultivators don't need to come up." A voice came from the small room of the Shanghua sect. "Io, it really is the Shanghua sect. You are really rich. Fellow cultivator Jiang, your sect even has such a rare thing. This is really beyond I's expectations." "Oh, it's just a coincidence." Zhang Daoyu from the Shanghua sect replied proudly. "Wait, I have a 300-year-old mother-child spirit fruit." A slightly arrogant voice also came from the small room. Hiss. Not only the people outside, even Zhang Daoyu from the Shanghua sect sucked in a breath of cold air. 100-year-old mother-child spirit fruit was already rare. How could there be a 300-year-old one? "Fellow cultivator, you have no proof. Take it out and let us see." Zhang Daoyu sneered. "Of course. I will bring it up now." "Fellow cultivator Jiang, are you going up as well?" "Of course." Zhang Daoyu retorted. Xiao Hua, who was sitting on a chair in the distance, was so happy that he went silly. When he heard the old man's voice from the yellow talisman saying that he wanted a 100-year-old mother-child spirit fruit, his brain immediately buzzed. It was louder than the noise in the room. He was dumbfounded. There was only one thought in his mind. "Damn it, I'm finally lucky. Oh my god, this is a complete Qi condensation cultivation method. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god." When Xiaohua was just at the first level of Qi condensation, the spirit herbs in his space were as long as a year. After entering the second level of Qi condensation, it seemed that one day was as long as 2 years. Now that he was already at the fourth level of Qi condensation, one day was as long as a few years. He really didn't pay attention to it. However, he didn't need to think too much. The mother-child spirit fruit in his space was definitely more than 100 years old. After all, after he transplanted it into the space, he didn't care about those mother-child spirit fruits anymore. On the high platform, Zhang Daoyu from the Shanghua sect walked up with a somewhat gloomy expression. He held a jade box in his hand. Not far from him, a tall cultivator in camouflage also held a jade box. Fellow cultivators, you can open the jade box. Presumably, after comparing with each other, you will know which cultivator's mother-child spirit fruit is older. And Chengma said with a smile. Fellow cultivator, please. Zhang Daoyu sneered. Hee, then I will go first. With that, the tall cultivator waved his hand, opened the jade box, and handed it to Zhang Daoyu. Zhang Daoyu glanced at it, and his face turned ashen. He muttered, There really is a 300-year-old mother-child spirit fruit. Sigh, it really opened my eyes. Immediately, he cupped his hands and said, I won't open it. This law embodiment of heaven and earth is yours. With that, he put the jade box into his storage bag and walked down the high platform. Good. And Chengma didn't miss the opportunity to shout. The last cultivation method of this auction has also been successfully bid. The owner of the cultivation method, please come up and remove the restriction on the cultivation method. Wait. At this moment, the dizzy Xiao Hua raised his hand and shouted, This old man also has a mother-child spirit fruit here. This fellow cultivator also has a mother-child spirit fruit. Then, how old is it? Could it be even older than 300 years? And Chengma didn't quite believe it. But looking at Xiao Hua, who had bid a few times before, he muttered in his heart, This was sent by the city lord? Hee, how old is it? This old man also doesn't know. If you know, take it out and compare it with this fellow cultivator, then you will know. Xiao Hua smiled, got up from the chair, and quickly walked up the high platform. At this moment, a cultivator in camouflage also walked up the high platform from another place. When Xiao Hua saw this, his heart thumped, and he secretly said, Oh no, could it be that this guy also has a mother-child spirit fruit? Fortunately, he heard Chengma laugh. Just in time. The owner of the cultivation method is here. Which of these two mother-child spirit fruit is older? Or which fellow cultivator's mother-child spirit fruit catches this fellow cultivator's eye, will depend on this fellow cultivator's choice. Xiao Hua and the other two were all wearing camouflage clothing. No one could clearly see each other, and no one knew who the other was. The cultivator holding the jade box in his hand pushed the jade box in front of the owner of the cultivation method and said, Fellow Taoist, please take a look. That cultivator swept a glance inside the jade box, nodded and said, Correct, this pay. Mother-child spirit fruit has the effect of 300 years. Then, he looked at Xiao Hua and asked, Where is this fellow Taoist's mother-child spirit fruit? Xiao Hua clapped his hand and took out the mother-child spirit fruit that had just been moved into the storage bag from the space, and didn't have time to find a jade box to put it in. Even though that cultivator was already prepared, when he saw the golden runes all over the mother-child spirit fruit, he still lost control and cried out. Just as that cultivator cried out, that cultivator waved his hand, and the mother-child spirit fruit disappeared from Xiao Hua's hand. Then, a jade box appeared in the cultivator's left hand, and the cultivator very nimbly put Xiao Hua's mother-child spirit fruit into the jade box, and then put it into his own storage bag. Fellow cultivator, when Xiao Hua saw that the mother-child spirit fruit was suddenly taken away by that cultivator, he was shocked at first, but then he was overjoyed. His mother-child spirit fruit was gone, and the other party gave him the cultivation method of heavenly law embodiment technique. -5. Chapter 1439. Sure enough, the cultivator slapped his hand again and took out something that looked like a talisman from his storage bag. He handed it to Xiao Hua with a smile and said, This is a talisman that can break the restriction of a cultivation method. You'll know once you use it. And Chengma also handed over the booklet and said with a smile, Please, this cultivation method is yours now. Then, he looked at the cultivator who was standing there in a daze and said with a smile, Fellow cultivator, please go back. Fellow cultivator's mother-child spirit fruit is very good, but it's still not old enough. Please. At this moment, the cultivator came to his senses. He turned his head and muttered, How is this possible? How can there be such an old mother-child spirit fruit? Xiaohua suppressed the excitement in his heart and took the thick booklet. He activated his spiritual power, and the runes on the talisman gradually flowed. Then, he slapped his hand and pressed it on the booklet. A burst of bright light flashed and the words, Heavenly Laws Embodiment Technique, appeared on the booklet. Xiaohua pretended to be very casual and flipped through it a few times. He nodded and said, Yes, this is the complete cultivation method. Those juniors of this old man are really blessed. Then, he slapped his hand and put the Heavenly Laws Embodiment Technique into his storage bag. He cupped his hands and said, Thank you, fellow cultivator. You're welcome, you're welcome. The cultivator also returned the greeting and said, If you want to say thanks, I still have to thank fellow cultivator. After the two finished speaking, they both came down from the high platform. Who is this cultivator? Why is he sitting down? How can he have a mother-child spirit fruit that's older than 300 years? Zhang Daoyu of the Shanghua sect had a gloomy expression. He stared at Xiaohua's back as he skipped back and racked his brains. At least 800 years. The old man from the Xuanyan sect also muttered. Xiaohua took out the mother-child spirit fruit very quickly, but the speed at which the cultivator put away the mother-child spirit fruit was even faster. He also didn't see clearly, but the thick golden runes on the mother-child spirit fruit were deeply imprinted in his mind. Who is this cultivator in camouflage? Why would he be willing to take out a complete cultivation technique for the sake of the mother-child spirit fruit? Even shopkeeper Liu of the Imperial Alchemy sect, who only had supreme-grade spirit stones and no mother-child spirit fruit, looked at the disappearing figure of the Mi Lu cultivator with a pensive look on his face. At this moment, and Chengma's voice sounded, Thank you all for your support. This auction has come to a successful conclusion. The next auction will be held in 1 month as usual. Before Chengmo could finish his words, Xiaohua saw a few people standing up from their seats and quickly walking towards the outside of the hall. Xiaohua thought for a moment and understood that these people were the cultivators who had won the pills and magic tools during the auction. So he immediately stood up and walked towards the direction where those people had disappeared. At this moment, on the high platform wherein Chengma was standing, a brilliant light shone again, illuminating the entire hall on the second floor. The number of disciples in the treasure auction pavilion had decreased significantly. Only a few disciples were standing beside the stairs leading to the first floor. Senior, this way please. Seeing Xiaohua rush over, a disciple greeted him from afar. Xiaohua vaguely replied. Senior, don't worry, there are no more disciples on the first floor. Senior can just leave from where you came from. Also, Senior doesn't need to worry. The restriction on the first floor has a spatial spell, so Senior won't be with others. Once Senior takes off the camouflage and leaves with others, no one will recognize you. The disciple saw that Xiaohua was in a hurry and was not as calm as the previous people, so he kindly reminded him, Oh, is that so? When Xiaohua heard this, he understood that he was a bit obsessed, so he paused for a moment and slowly walked down the stairs. Sure enough, as the disciple said, not a single disciple on the first floor could see him. Xiaohua calmly walked into the darkness of the restriction. In the darkness, Xiaohua kept the cultivation technique and other things into his space, then took off the camouflage. After waiting for a moment, he thought that it was about time. Then he calmly walked out. Outside the treasure auction pavilion, it was already past noon, and the bright sun was already slightly to the west. Hundreds of cultivators rushed out of the treasure auction pavilion and entered the plaza in the middle of the city. It looked a bit crowded, but when they really scattered in the plaza, they were all blocked by the huge pillars, and in a moment, they seemed scattered. Fellow Taoist Xiao. A voice sounded from the side of a huge pillar. Xiaohua looked over and saw that it was Xue Xue. Io, fellow Taoist Xue. Xiaohua's face was full of smiles. He quickly walked forward, cupped his hands, looked left and right, and said in a low voice, Congratulations, you made a small profit. Hee. Isn't this all thanks to fellow Taoist Xiao? Xue Xue had bright eyes and white teeth, and the smile on her face was very bright. She cupped her hands and said, I also didn't expect that this clear fragrance pill would actually be so popular. If I had known earlier, I would have gotten more marrow-cleansing pills from Imperial Pill School. But, fellow Taoist Xiao, you took so many clear fragrance pills and clean lotus pills. Why didn't you bid? Hehe, fellow Taoist Shui and Imperial Pill School have both put up their pills this time. How much can I bid for with these pills? Xiao Hua's eyes turned, and he said in a low voice, this time, the treasure auction pavilion has put up so many pills, there will definitely be a lot of cultivators who will come after hearing the news in the next auction. Hehe, by that time, will fellow Taoist Shui and Imperial Pill School still have so many pills? Fellow Taoist Xiao, when Shui heard this, her face was filled with astonishment. She raised her hand and gave him a thumbs up. She repeatedly said, hi 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 hi. This poor Taoist truly admires you. I'm ashamed. Xiao Hua secretly wiped his cold sweat. Then, he heard Shui say with some regret, unfortunately, I will be going out in a few days, and I'm afraid I won't be able to return for a few months. Otherwise, I would like to see how many spirit stones fellow Taoist Xiao can earn. There will be a chance, Xiao Hua said with a smile. But right at this moment, a faint divine sense was suddenly sent out from afar, and it swept over Xiao Hua's body. Oh no! Xiao Hua's heart thumped. Although his face was calm, he had long been muttering in his heart. When I came out, it seemed like there were a lot of cultivators in the surroundings. It's not very likely that someone would know. Moreover, this divine sense seems to belong to an early-stage foundation establishment cultivator. There's no reason for it to pay attention to a small character like me, right? Fellow Taoist Xiao, your complexion doesn't look too good. Shui saw that Xiao Hua was in a daze, so she quickly asked, yes, what's wrong? Xiao Hua came back to his senses and waved his hand repeatedly. No, it's nothing. Then, he sighed and said, sigh, thinking about that auction. There were so many good things, but I couldn't bid for a single one. It's really regretful, especially that cultivation technique. Of course, Shui also echoed. I also didn't expect that a complete cultivation technique would appear. How about? At this time, the divine sense that swept over Xiao Hua's body gradually withdrew, and Shui stuck out her tongue at the same time. There's no need. That last cultivator actually took out a mother-child spirit fruit that's even older than 300 years old. I'm afraid I can't take it out. If fellow Taoist can't take it out, I can't take it out even more. So, it's just a pity. It's useless. Xiao Hua also spread his hands. Oh right, fellow Taoist Xiao, don't you have other fellow Taoists? Why did you come out alone? Shui slapped her forehead, thought of something, and looked left and right. Xiao Hua was also puzzled. At this time, there were already a lot of cultivators coming out of the treasure auction pavilion. Why hadn't Kaixuoxia appeared yet? Could it be there's no need to think about any other possibilities? Just as Xiao Hua turned his head, Kaixuoxia's figure appeared at the entrance of the treasure auction pavilion. Fellow Taoist Kai. Xiao Hua saw Kaixuoxia looking left and right, and immediately shouted. Seeing Xiao Hua wave his hand, Kaixuoxia slightly nodded, but when she saw Shui next to Xiao Hua, Kaixuoxia slightly frowned. When she got closer, she cupped her hands and smiled. This is fellow Taoist Shui, right? I'm Liu Yang's Kai family's Kaixuoxia. I heard fellow Taoist Xiao mention you the day before yesterday. I still have to thank fellow Taoist Shui for your invitation. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to participate in this auction. Hehe, no need to thank. No need to thank. I and fellow Taoist Xiao each did what we needed. No need to thank me. Shui casually waved her hand, and then casually asked, I wonder what fellow Taoist Kai obtained in the auction. I wanted spirit stones, but I didn't have spirit stones. I wanted mother-child spirit fruit, but I didn't have mother-child spirit fruit. What could I have obtained? I was just casually looking around, Kaixuoxia said with a smile. Shui still wanted to say something, but a crimson-red message talisman flew over from afar and stopped in front of her. Shui clapped her hands and took the message talisman in her hand. She looked into the distance, then cupped her hands and said, I will bid farewell to these two beauties. If fate wills it, We'll meet again in the future. Beauties? Xiaohua was greatly embarrassed. He hurriedly waved his hand and said, Fellow Taoist Shui, you're mistaken. Who would have thought that although Kai Zhuoxia's face was red, she still cupped her hands and said, Fellow Taoist Shui, we'll meet again someday. Hee, we'll meet again someday, Shui said and quickly walked away. That? Xiaohua opened his mouth, wanting to ask why, but when Kai Zhuoxia turned her head and asked him, What's wrong, fellow Taoist Xiao? He felt that he didn't know where to start, so he could only smile and say, No, nothing. If fellow Taoist Xiao doesn't have anything to do in Yinyuan City, let's quickly go to Shihuang Town. There's still quite a distance from Shihuang Town to Yinlin Marsh. Kai Zhuoxia's tone was somewhat indifferent. I'm still waiting to return to Luyang. Okay, I'll listen to fellow Taoist Kai's instructions. Xiaohua didn't know why Kai Zhuoxia's tone suddenly changed, but he still nodded. Yinyuan City's teleportation array was on the west side of the plaza. It was a courtyard that looked like a garden. The door of the courtyard was wide open. For armored Yinyuan City guards stood on both sides of the door. They looked straight ahead, giving off a very imposing feeling. Fellow Taoist Kai. Xiaohua followed Kai Zhuoxia to the courtyard. As they walked towards the door, he asked in a low voice, This is the teleportation array of Yinyuan City? Why aren't there any cultivators going in and out? Fellow Taoist Xiao, what do you think it should be like? People coming and going? Endless flow? Kai Zhuoxia's face was a little strange as she asked in a low voice. -5. Chapter 1440. That's right. Although it doesn't have to be an endless stream, it shouldn't be so deserted. Xiaohua looked at the deserted hall and said strangely, Fellow Taoist Xiao, please follow me in. You'll know when the time comes. Kai Zhuoxia replied indifferently. When Xiaohua and Kai Zhuoxia walked in front of them, a city guard stepped forward and said loudly, Fellow Taoists, do you want to use the transportation formation of my Yinyuan City? Yes, we want to go to Shihuang Town. We came here to register a few days ago. I wonder if we can go today. Kai Zhuoxia cupped her hands and said, Shihuang Town? Please wait a moment. As he spoke, the city guard took out a disc-shaped magic tool from his waist and struck it with a yellow talisman in his left hand. A cluster of misty light was emitted from the disc. The city guard looked at it and said with a smile, So it's fellow Taoist Kai Zhuoxia. What a coincidence. There are 3 other fellow Taoists who are also going to Shihuang Town. The appointment is also today. Please follow me in. Kai Zhuoxia frowned. The other 3 fellow Taoists are all male cultivators? Yes. The city guard waved his hand and the light on the disc disappeared. He raised his hand and said with a smile, Fellow Taoists, please follow me. As he spoke, he took the lead and walked into the courtyard. Xiaohua looked at them with a puzzled expression. When he saw Kai Zhuoxia walk in, he also followed and didn't ask a single question. Inside the courtyard, there were some strange flowers and plants, as well as some fake mountains and huge rocks. It looked very pleasing to the eye. After walking through a few corridors, they arrived in front of a room. The city guard smiled and said, Fellow Taoists, please wait inside. The other 3 fellow Taoists should be here soon. Thank you. Kai Zhuoxia cupped her hands and walked into the room. Xiaohua nodded at the city guard and followed her in. This was a room that was neither big nor small. There weren't many decorations inside. Only 5 chairs and 5 tables were neatly placed inside. Kai Zhuoxia seemed to be used to it. She directly picked up a chair and sat down, closing her eyes without saying a word. Why is she so strange? When Xiaohua saw Kai Zhuoxia's abnormal reaction, he was somewhat puzzled. However, he didn't know where to start, so he just casually sat beside her. After waiting for a while, Xiaohua still didn't see anyone enter. He simply immersed his mind into the space, comprehending the trajectory of the heavenly Tao. Just as he had gained some insight, he was awakened by a commotion. When he opened his eyes, the sky was already a little dark. It seemed that a long time had passed. He looked at Kai Zhuoxia beside him. Her face was still cold. At this moment, she also opened her eyes and raised her head to look at the door. At the entrance, another city guard led 3 cultivators in a single file. Fellow Taoists, Are you heading to Shihuang Town as well? The city guard asked expressionlessly. That's right. Xiao Hua nodded. All right, this is the teleportation formation talisman. Take it. The city guard didn't beat around the bush. He took out 5 two-finger-wide yellow talismans from his bosom and handed them to Xiao Hua, Kaizhuxia, and the 3 cultivators who came in later. Only now did Xiao Hua carefully size up these 3 cultivators. The 3 cultivators were of average height. 2 of them were tanned and strong with a fierce face. The last one was fair and clean, looking somewhat weak. However, the 3 of them were in the 7th layer of Qi refinement, so Xiao Hua didn't dare to underestimate them. The city guard gave the 5 talismans to the 5 cultivators and said, "Fellow Taoists, please pay me the spirit stones used for the teleportation. Each teleportation costs 5 high-grade spirit stones. Fellow Taoists, it's exactly 1 high-grade spirit stone for each of you." Ah! After listening to the words of the city guard, Xiao Hua finally understood what Kaizhuxia was talking about at the entrance. Every teleportation requires a piece of high-grade spirit stone, so expensive, no wonder. Not many cultivators are willing to use this teleportation array. Fortunately, Xiao Hua was no longer as distressed as he was in Jinghua City. He patted his storage pouch, took out 2 high-grade spirit stones, and handed them over. Kaizhuxia originally wanted to take it, but when she saw Xiao Hua take it, she also put down her hand. However, the expression on her face seemed to be somewhat relaxed. The city guard kept the spirit stones and walked straight to the corner of the room. He took out another round plate from his chest. This round plate was different from the previous one. The city guard activated his Fa Li and pointed his finger. A pale yellow light beam shot out from the round plate and shone on the wall in the corner of the room. Not long after, the corner of the wall began to gradually melt, and a round moon door appeared in front of everyone. Fellow Taoists, please follow me. The city guard put away the disc, waved his hand, and took the lead to walk through the moon gate. Fellow Taoists, please. The slightly weak cultivator of the 3 raised his hand and said with a smile, "Please." Xiao Hua and Kaizhuxia both nodded and followed the city guard in. Just now, when they were in the room, they couldn't see the situation inside the moon gate. Only after Xiao Hua stepped through the moon gate did he see the situation inside clearly. This was a rather large space, and the first thing Xiao Hua saw was a not-so-large spirit design. This array was in the shape of an oval, and it was located in the center of the space. The array emitted a gray color, and one could vaguely see black and white alternating rapidly. Xiao Hua looked at it a few times, but he couldn't tell what this array was made of. He also couldn't tell if the array was on the ground or embedded in the ground. Soon after, Xiao Hua looked around and saw that there were walls flickering with a faint white light everywhere in this space. Above his head was a tall roof. Looking at the distance, he was afraid that it was more than 10 feet high. The strange runes on the roof weren't blurred because of the distance. Instead, they were very clear, as if they were right in front of him. Around the walls, there were dozens of armored city guards evenly surrounding the entire space, which also happened to surround the formation in the middle. Fellow Taoists, please stick the teleportation formation on your body. Enter the teleportation formation. The city guard said, "This one will go and ask the elder to come over." When the city guard turned around and left, Xiao Hua and the other 4 people entered the formation. The formation wasn't big, so it was just right for the 5 of them to stand inside. Xiao Hua lowered his head and looked at the gray light under his feet. He had a very familiar feeling, so he lowered his voice and asked, "Fellow Taoist Kai, what's the use of this formation talisman? Isn't there a teleportation formation?" Kaizhuxia knew that Xiao Hua was asking about the difference between this formation talisman and the one from Huanhua sect. She glanced at him and said in a low voice, "Although the teleportation formation talisman is a low-grade talisman, it can only move people for a short distance. Although it's called teleportation, it's actually thousands of miles away. For places like Shihuang Town that are far away, they can only rely on teleportation formations. And the pressure produced by teleportation formations is enormous. If you're not a nascent soul cultivator, you won't be able to withstand it. I'm afraid that Qi condensation cultivators like us will be crushed into meat paste." This formation talisman is used in conjunction with the teleportation formation. It distributes the pressure of teleportation to the formation and reduces the damage caused by teleportation. Oh, so it's like that. Xiaohua nodded. However, with our cultivation levels in the middle stage of qi condensation, it's still difficult. Every time we teleport, we'll be dizzy for a long time. Kaizhuoxia said with some lingering fear. Is that so? Xiaohua's heart stirred. He thought about how he felt when he used Huan Hua Sect's teleportation talisman. The teleportation talisman is already like that. Since this teleportation formation is so far away, it must be even more unbearable. Xiaohua and Kaizhuoxia whispered to each other on the side. The other three cultivators stood on the side, looking down and not saying anything. Not long after, two old men with white hair and beards walked out from the wall. Judging from their cultivation levels, they were both in the late stage of foundation establishment. The two old men each held a pagoda-shaped magic tool in their hands. They walked to the two sides of the teleportation formation and stood steadily. Then, they formed seals in their hands and sent the seals into the magic tools in their hands. The pagoda-shaped magic tools gradually lit up layer by layer. When a round bead at the top of the pagoda became completely transparent, the two old men shouted in a low voice, "Go!" The magic tools in their hands faintly pointed forward. Two beams of black and white light shot out from the two beads, shooting straight into the teleportation formation. With a burst of crackling sounds, the black and white lights in the teleportation formation flickered at the same time. A gray light cover rose, enveloping Xiaohua and the other four people. The gray light cover flickered several times, and Xiaohua and the other four people disappeared. At the same time that Xiaohua and the others disappeared, a burst of enormous pressure pressed down from all directions. With a muffled pop, the formation talismans that were stuck on the five people's bodies a moment ago suddenly emitted a burst of faint gray light, enveloping the five people within. A burst of enormous pressure followed by a burst of confusion in his mind. Xiaohua's vision darkened, and then it lit up again, followed by a burst of dizziness. Xiaohua's figure slightly swayed, seemingly about to go limp, but he stood upright and steady. This feeling, why is it so familiar? Xiaohua's eyes were somewhat blurred. He stood there blankly, not moving in the slightest. Oh, this little guy is quite fierce. He actually didn't collapse on the ground. An astonished voice startled Xiaohua awake. When he raised his head to look, he saw a middle-stage foundation establishment cultivator around 50 years old, dressed in a gray Taoist robe. The middle-stage foundation establishment cultivator was standing not too far away from him, looking at him with wide eyes. Next to him, there were two qi condensation cultivators who were also looking at him in amazement. Xiaohua suddenly woke up. When he looked to the side, he saw Kaizhuoxia and the other three 7th-level qi condensation cultivators all sitting on the ground with pale faces. They were also staring at him. These people all had such strange gazes. Xiaohua himself felt embarrassed, but at this time, it was too late to pretend to be dizzy. Xiaohua could only rub his nose and laugh bitterly in his heart. What are you staring blankly for? Hurry up and help these fellow Taoists out. That foundation establishment cultivator turned his head and instructed the two cultivators next to him. Maybe there will be more people coming over in a while. Yes, disciples will go over right now. The two disciples came to their senses and hurriedly stepped forward. Fellow Taoist Xiao, please help I up. Seeing the two cultivators coming over, Kaizhuoxia promptly said to Xiaohua, "Okay." Xiaohua responded, helping Kaizhuoxia up and helping her to a praying mat not far away. Seeing Kaizhuoxia close her eyes and adjust her breathing, Xiaohua could only stand to the side. The other three cultivators were also helped out and sat separately on the praying mats. -5. Chapter 1441. Xiaohua was in a small room. In the middle of the room, there was a transportation array that was much smaller than the one in Yinyuan City. There were a dozen or so praying mats scattered in the corners of the room. Inside the room, aside from the foundation establishment old man and two qi refining disciples, there were also 8 armored cultivators standing in the 4 corners of the room. Their armors were slightly different from those in Yinyuan City, but there were also many similarities. Little guy, do you have a Qian Kuan teleportation token on you? Xiao Hua was looking around when a voice sounded in his ear. N? Xiao Hua frowned and looked around. He saw the Foundation establishment old man looking at him with a smile. This old man will transmit a message to you. Don't be afraid, others can't hear it. The old man's lips seemed to be moving. Xiao Hua looked directly at him and didn't know if these words were spoken by the old man. Xiao Hua rubbed his nose and didn't know how to answer. Hee, little guy. If you don't want to say it, then forget it. The old man's voice sounded again. If you don't have a Qian Kuren teleportation token, how can you stand in the transportation array with your Qi refining stage for cultivation? Xiao Hua really didn't know what a Qian Kuren teleportation token was and didn't understand why he only felt dizzy for a short period of time. Therefore, he couldn't answer. Just as Xiao Hua was feeling awkward, the transportation array behind the Foundation establishment old man faintly glowed with gray light. Io, why is it so lively today? Waves after waves of people just arrived. Many cultivators have come in the past few days. The Foundation establishment old man said with an unknown expression. He turned around and looked. The teleportation array flashed and then stopped. For cultivators, 3 men and 1 woman were teleported over. The one in front was an early Foundation establishment stage cultivator, about 30 years old. His face showed signs of pain, but he was still standing steadily. The 3 people beside him, like Kaizhuixia, were also paralyzed on the ground. Fellow Taoist, please. The Foundation establishment cultivator saw the Foundation establishment old man outside the transportation array and smiled. Is this Shihuang village? Hee, this is Shihuang village. I am Emoguang from Yinyuan City. Welcome, fellow Taoist. The Foundation establishment old man returned the greeting. So it's Yenabis City's fellow Taoist Emo. It's an honor to meet you. The Foundation establishment cultivator cupped his fists and said, I'm Pu Jinyuan from Flying Phoenix Ridge. Io, so it's Flying Phoenix Ridge's Pu clan. You must be the current head of the Pu clan, right? I was truly disrespectful. Mo Guang's face was filled with astonishment as he once again cupped his hands. I wouldn't dare. The Pu clan is nothing compared to Yenabis City, and I's cultivation is like the light of a firefly compared to you. I don't deserve your respect. Although Pu Jinyuan's words were humble, there was a trace of pride on his face. Little ones, hurry up and help the Pu clan's disciple out of the teleportation array. Mo Guang shouted. The 2 beside him scrambled to help the female cultivator. We don't dare to trouble you 2 Dao friends. Pu Jinyuan waved his hand, and the female cultivator and the other 2 disciples floated into the air and followed him out of the teleportation array. Fellow Taoist Xiao. Xiao Hua watched from the side with interest. Kaizhuixia had already opened her eyes and slowly stood up. Oh, fellow Taoist Kai, can move now? Xiao Hua turned his head and asked curiously. Of course, it wasn't only Kaizhuixia who stood up. The 3 cultivators who were teleported together with Xiao Hua had also stood up and were currently walking towards a door in the room that was emitting a faint light. I's already fine. We can go now. Kaizhuixia nodded. Xiao Hua smiled and said, We'll listen to fellow Taoist Kai's instructions. At this moment, the 3 cultivators had already walked to the door. Among them, the slightly frail cultivator intentionally turned his head to look at Xiao Hua. When Xiao Hua noticed and looked again, the 3 people had already walked out of the room. When Xiao Hua and Kaizhuixia walked out of the room, they discovered that they were on top of a towering cliff. Below the cliff, there was a large area of houses and pavilions, terraced fields, and even a river ferry. It was a not small town. As for the 3 cultivators just now, their figures had already flown into the air and gradually disappeared. Those 3 cultivators. Why are they also going in the direction of Flame Forest Marsh? Kaizhuixia didn't lower her head to look at Shihuang Town, but rather looked in the direction that the 3 cultivators disappeared in. It can't be that. Something happened in Flame Forest Marsh, right? Xiao Hua asked in a low voice. Just now, in the teleportation formation, did the Pu clan of Flying Phoenix Ridge come again? Moreover, their clan master also came. I don't have ears. Can't I hear it myself? Kaizhuixia rolled her eyes at him and said indifferently, I. Xiao Hua opened his mouth and secretly said in his heart, Did I provoke you? Let's go. Kaixuoxiao waved her hand and flew into the air. She didn't go in the same direction as the three cultivators. Xiaohua didn't say anything and followed closely behind. After flying for a while, Kaixuoxia and Oshir turned around and went back the way they came. Fellow Taoist Kai, what are you doing? Xiaohua followed behind and couldn't help but ask. But just as he opened his mouth, on the distant cliff, Pu Jianyuan came out of the small house with the teleportation formation with 3 disciples. Seeing Kaixuoxia and Xiaohua fly back to the small house, he only faintly scanned them with his divine sense and flew in the direction of Flame Forest Marsh. When Kaixuoxia saw Pu Jianyuan come out, she immediately stood respectfully in the air and quietly waited for Pu Jianyuan to fly away. Then, she slowly flew for a while and stopped in the air. At this time, Xiaohua also understood Kaixuoxia's meaning. He flew to Kaixuoxia's side and said in a low voice, "So, the Pu clan of Flying Phoenix Ridge is also going to Flame Forest Marsh." "Yes, of course. What do you think?" Kaixuoxia rolled her eyes at him unhappily. Pu Jianyuan is a foundation establishment cultivator. We don't have divine sense, so if we hide on the side, we will definitely be discovered by him. Then, she raised her head and looked in the direction of Flame Forest Marsh. After thinking for a while, she gritted her teeth and said, "They are only going in the direction of Flame Forest Marsh. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to Flame Forest Marsh. Besides, Flame Forest Marsh is so big, we may not necessarily meet them. Let's go." Finished speaking, Kaixuoxia took the lead and flew away. However, her direction was still a bit off, not exactly the same as the direction of the people in front of her. Just as Xiaohua flew after him, far away in Yinyuan City, outside the courtyard where the transportation formation was located, Shui followed a Fat Foundation establishment cultivator into the room where the transportation formation was located. Beside him were several cultivators around the 8th layer of qi condensation. They were all entering the room where the transportation formation was located. Next to the Fat Foundation establishment cultivator, a guard of Yinyuan City asked curiously, "Fellow Taoist Ling, why are you in such a hurry? I remember that fellow Taoist is scheduled to go to Shihuang Town tomorrow. Why do you want to go there today? It is already late, and fellow Taoist wants to go with 8 people at once. It is really difficult for me to explain." The fat on the fat cultivator's face trembled. He clapped his hands and secretly stuffed a few high-grade spirit stones into the guard's hands. He smiled and said, "I have no choice. It is all because of the rush. If I can go a day earlier, then I will go a day earlier." The guard waved his hand and received the spirit stones. He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Ling is a frequent visitor of my Yinyuan City. Even the city lord has seen fellow Taoist Ling more than once. How can we dare to neglect you? It is just that we need to talk to the elder a bit more. These days, there are really too many cultivators going to Shihuang Town." These days, which cultivators went there? Are there any that I know? The fat cultivator's eyes turned, and he asked with a smile. "Hee, they are all unknown cultivators. Even if I can't remember their names, I am sure that fellow Taoist Ling wouldn't know them either." The guard smiled and didn't say the names of the people who were going to be transported. While they were talking, they had already arrived at the place where Xiaohua and the others were transported. "Fellow Taoist Ling, please wait a moment. I will ask the elder to come over." The guard cupped his hands and left. Shui whispered, "Uncle, I'm afraid there are some problems. Why did so many people go to Shihuang Town? Could it be Shui?" The fat cultivator glared at Shui and said in a low voice, "The more people there are, the more it proves that the matter is true. Otherwise, Uncle wouldn't have arrived today in advance. The earlier we go, the earlier we have a sliver of opportunity." Ling Jingyi, if you don't know your Misty Mountain, why are you going to Shihuang Town?" A voice rang out. It was precisely the 2 late-stage Foundation establishment cultivators who were controlling the transportation formation. "Greetings, fellow Taoist Bai and fellow Taoist Liao." Ling Jingyi cupped his hands and said, "I went to Shihuang Town to visit an old friend. Because I was afraid that he would go wandering, I was in a hurry to go this time." Hee. One cultivator looked at the other and laughed. "Do you believe Fatty Ling's words?" That cultivator glanced at Ling Jingyi and laughed. You can't believe even 1 out of 10 of his words. I don't think you can believe even half a word. Haha, even if you don't believe it, how can we not let him go to Shihuang Town? That cultivator laughed loudly and raised his hand. Fellow Daoistling, please. Ling Jingyi cupped his hands towards the 2 people and led Xue Xue and 3 others into the transportation formation. Following the flicker of gray light within the transportation formation, the 4 people's figures disappeared. Outside Shihuang Town, in the already dark sky, Xiao Hua flew with Kai Zhuoxia for a while and said in a low voice, "Fellow Daoist Kai, I have something to ask." "What is it?" In the darkness, Kai Zhuoxia said with a smile at the corner of her mouth. "What's a universe-shifting token?" Universe-shifting token? Kai Zhuoxia stared blankly. Obviously, this question wasn't what she thought. Doesn't fellow Daoist Xiao have this thing on him? Why are you still asking about I thought fellow Daoist was going to ask why we didn't directly go to Blazing Forest Marsh. Even if fellow Daoist Kai didn't lead me, I definitely wouldn't directly go to Blazing Forest Marsh. What's there to ask about this? Xiao Hua said with a smile. It's just that. I don't quite understand. Why did fellow Daoist and that Foundation establishment senior from before all say that I have a universe-shifting token on me? Fellow Daoist Xiao really doesn't have one? At this time, astonishment appeared in Kai Zhuoxia's eyes. I thought fellow Daoist was hiding it. However, since fellow Daoist doesn't have a universe-shifting token, why didn't you feel dizzy like I? Why didn't you collapse on the ground? Fellow Daoist Kai, after talking for so long, what exactly is a universe-shifting token? Xiao Hua asked with a bitter smile. Kai Zhuoxia lowered her head and looked, then pointed with her finger. Today, we'll rest here. After we land, I'll tell you. -5. Chapter 1442. Previously, didn't fellow Daoist Xiao ask about the formation talisman used for transportation? It's used in conjunction with transportation formations. Every transportation formation has its own special formation talisman, and they can't be replaced. Outside of this formation talisman, there's another special item. This item is the Universe Transference Token. The Universe Transference Token is a formation talisman? No, the Universe Transference Token isn't a formation talisman, nor is it a spirit talisman. It might be a magic tool, or it might be a magic treasure. However, as for what it is, only a few people know. Kai Zhuoxia sat cross-legged on a blue stone under the moonlight and said very mysteriously, because this universe transference token came from the distant past, and the refining method has long been lost. Even the universe transference token's material is unknown now. How is it so powerful? Xiao Hua also sat cross-legged across from Kai Zhuoxia, and he cried out involuntarily, "Powerful?" Fellow Daoist Zhao's understanding is somewhat wrong. Kai Zhuoxia covered her mouth and laughed. That universe transference token admittedly came from the distant past, but this item can only be used for transportation, especially long-distance transportation. When used in conjunction with a formation talisman, it can reduce the discomfort of the person being transported. Or in some transportation formations, it can also be used alone to reduce the pressure during transportation. Presumably, that Foundation establishment senior saw that you, a 4th-level Qi condensation cultivator, could actually stand steadily in the transportation formation, so he asked you this. That's right, fellow Daoist Xiao, you still haven't told I. Forget it. I'll just pretend I didn't ask anything. Halfway through her words, Kai Zhuoxia changed the topic and said self-mockingly, I hurriedly went to reserve a transportation formation when I was free, but a certain person actually minded his own business, and even knew some female cultivators? Xiao Hua's heart trembled, and he finally understood the subtlety of Kai Zhuoxia's attitude today. But, fellow Daoist Kai and Li Zhengbao, the more Xiao Hua thought, the more afraid he became, because Li Zhengbao was a Foundation establishment senior. When Li Zhengbao left, he gave him 2 message talismans. That thought, as an outsider, how could Xiao Hua not see it? And Kai Zhuoxia was actually angry because he knew Xue Xue. What should he do? Thinking of Li Zhengbao's flying sword, Xiao Hua shuddered. That, fellow Daoist Kai, I only met Shui by chance. Is she a loose cultivator, or a cultivator's family, or perhaps a cultivator's sect? I don't know anything. The more Xiaohua spoke, the more he stuttered. In the end, he didn't even know what he was saying. Fellow Taoist Kai, this poor Taoist is going to cultivate. Since we want to avoid them, we should hide here for a while. After saying this, Xiaohua's body flashed and he flew into the cave behind him. Why is this fellow speaking incoherently today? Kai Zhuoxia looked at Xiaohuafei's back in a very strange manner as she thought to herself. Then, he raised his head to look at the gradually rising full moon and muttered, "Alas, I hope that we will be able to stay together for 1,000 miles. I wonder, how is he doing now?" Presumably, for him to enter the foundation establishment stage at such a young age, any sect would pay attention to him. He will definitely be nurtured by his sect, and on the road of cultivation. His future will be limitless, and the great Tao will be within reach. As for me, compared to him, I am only a village woman. Why should I delay him? Kai Zhuoxia's eyes were somewhat blurred as she looked up at the bright moon in the sky. If there is true love in one's heart, even if endless years pass, one won't necessarily be lonely. But, without me by his side, will he remember me? For a moment, Kai Zhuoxia's emotions were jumbled up, and it was difficult to sort them out. Under the hazy moonlight, she looked around in self-pity and didn't have the slightest thought of cultivating. Inside the cave, Xiaohua calmed his heart and took out the heavenly laws embodiment technique from the space and carefully looked through it. Xiaohua hadn't seen cultivation techniques after the 5th layer of qi refining, so he could only pick up the 1st to 4th layer to carefully look through them. After carefully looking through them, Xiaohua couldn't help but be overjoyed. From the cultivation techniques records and cultivation, this heavenly laws embodiment technique seemed to be comparable to Shang Huoming's cultivation technique, but in some aspects, it was more extensive, and he felt that it was more suitable for male cultivators. And comparing it with raising fire to the heavens, he could almost be sure that this heavenly laws embodiment technique was definitely of a higher level than raising fire to the heavens. No matter whether it was the details of the cultivation technique or the method of refining the meridians, they couldn't be mentioned in the same breath. What made Xiaohua the most happy was the heavenly laws embodiment technique. At the end of every layer, there would be an appendix of basic cultivation techniques that could be practiced and used at that layer of cultivation. What heaven's eye technique, what object controlling technique, they were all included. Strange. After Xiaohua's joy, he felt a little strange again. If it was a coarse cultivation technique like raising fire to the heavens that was exchanged for some 100-year-old child mother spirit fruit, I could still believe it. But this is actually comparable to Shang Huoming's complete cultivation technique. How could he be willing to take it out? It's really inconceivable. What's the value of this cultivation technique? And what's the value of a 100-year-old child mother spirit fruit? If it weren't for the fact that this young master's child mother spirit fruit was old enough, I'm afraid that cultivator would have suffered a huge loss. And then should I change my cultivation technique now? Or should I continue cultivating raising fire to the heavens? Xiaohua was a little hesitant. After thinking for a while, he opened Heavenly Laws Embodiment Technique again and slowly read through the rest of the cultivation technique bit by bit. Soon after, he closed his eyes and carefully pondered. The 12 layers of qi refining are divided into low-level, mid-level, and high-level. But from the Heavenly Laws Embodiment Technique, it seems that the 4 layers in the middle of each level are very closely related. And between each level, there seems to be a bottleneck, or a comprehension of the realm. If I want to change my cultivation technique, it's best to finish cultivating the 4 low-level layers and properly consolidate the low-level realm before cultivating a new cultivation technique. And I haven't seen the other cultivation techniques before. It seems this Heavenly Laws Embodiment Technique, when it's at the foundation establishment stage, it seems to be somewhat unfinished. Could it be this cultivation technique still has a part for the foundation establishment stage? Thinking of this, Xiaohua's heart suddenly heated up, and he inwardly said, if I can get the other part of this Heavenly Laws Embodiment Technique into my hands, how great would that be? Soon after, Xiaohua covered his mouth and laughed. This person, he's always unsatisfied. Before today, he was still thinking about how to find a cultivation technique for the 6th layer of chi refining. Now that he's gotten a cultivation technique for before the foundation establishment stage, he's thinking about the foundation establishment stage. I'd better save it and finish cultivating this 12th layer of chi refining first. I'm not Li Zongbao. Maybe I won't be able to cultivate to the foundation establishment stage in this lifetime. Li Zongbao. Thinking of Li Zongbao, Xiaohua's heart trembled again, and he inwardly said, looking at Kai Zhuoxia's intentions, she can't be thinking of shifting her affections to someone else, right? It seems that after the Flame Forest Mountain Marsh, I'd better have less contact with her. As for that Luyang Kai clan, it'd be better if I didn't go there. Soon after, Xiaohua calmed his mind and flipped the Heavenly Laws embodiment technique to the 8th and 11th layers of chi refining. At the end of the 8th layer, the cultivation technique introduced a method of using spirit stones to cultivate. This was something that Xiaohua learned from other cultivators, and he had long been drooling over it. He didn't expect to see it today in the Heavenly Laws embodiment technique. And at the end of the 11th layer of chi refining, there was also a mnemonic chant. The book clearly stated that this mnemonic chant could stimulate the growth of divine sense in preparation for the 12th layer of chi refining to produce incomparably powerful divine sense. Xiaohua first looked at the method of using spirit stones to cultivate. This cultivation technique didn't seem to be difficult. It only required one to use the acupoints on both hands to absorb the spiritual energy from spirit stones into one's body. It was essentially the same as when cultivating basic cultivation techniques, drawing spiritual energy into one's body. However, the method was much more ingenious. After reading this, Xiaohua somewhat impatiently flipped to the very end of the book and carefully comprehended the mnemonic chant that could stimulate the growth of divine sense. After reading it, Xiaohua actually felt that it was somewhat familiar. This mnemonic chant was actually similar to the nameless mnemonic chant that he practiced every day. Could it be that nameless mnemonic chant can actually stimulate the growth of divine sense? Xiaohua frowned as he thought, but if it's also stimulating the growth of divine sense, this Heavenly Laws embodiment technique's mnemonic chant seems to have something even more mysterious. Could it be that this thing is the essence of the mnemonic chant? Then, doesn't that mean that the Heavenly Laws embodiment technique's mnemonic chant is of a higher level than the nameless mnemonic chant? The generated divine sense is even more powerful? But immediately after, Xiaohua was somewhat hesitant. This cultivation technique was easy to talk about. After he finished cultivating the 4th layer of chi refining, he could use the Heavenly Laws embodiment technique to continue cultivating from the middle layer of chi refining. However, this nameless mnemonic chant was something that he had comprehended long ago and had been cultivating all along. And he didn't know whether or not the perception of divine sense appeared because of this nameless mnemonic chant. If he changed the Heavenly Laws embodiment technique's mnemonic chant, would this perception disappear? Moreover, the Heavenly Laws embodiment technique's mnemonic chant can only be comprehended at the 11th layer of chi refining. Could he practice it now? Divine sense is the foundation of a foundation establishment cultivator. If he was careless and cultivated it incorrectly, not to mention whether or not he could produce divine sense, even if he was weaker than others in the future, wouldn't he be letting down the results of his cultivation that he had painstakingly cultivated? Forget it, cultivation techniques aren't necessarily good only if they're of a high level. It's best if they're suitable for me. After thinking for a long time, Xiaohua finally came to a decision. Immediately after, Xiaohua took out 2 pieces of top-quality fire attribute spirit stones from his space. He silently recited the cultivation technique that used spirit stones to cultivate in his heart for a while. According to the cultivation technique, he slowly absorbed the spiritual energy of heaven and earth from the spirit stones. A wave of slightly hot, spiritual energy quickly followed Xiaohua's circulation and entered his meridians from his hand. This seems somewhat familiar. Xiaohua thought very strangely. After holding the spirit stones in his hand and cultivating for a while, Xiaohua took out a clean lotus pill and put it into his mouth. The cool medicinal power of the clean lotus pill fused with the hot spiritual energy of the spirit stones, causing the meridians of his entire body to feel incomparably comfortable. For 3 days in a row, Xiao Hua and Kai Zhuoxia each went into seclusion and didn't take half a step out of the cave. On the morning of the fourth day, Kai Zhuoxia sent a message and Xiao Hua came out of seclusion. In these 3 days, Xiao Hua's 2 top-quality fire attribute spirit stones didn't have much of a change. Kai Zhuoxia seemed to have something on her mind. When she saw Xiao Hua fly out, she didn't take a closer look and called out to him again, flying in the direction of the Flame Forest Mountains. -5. Chapter 1443. Because he had misgivings in his heart, Xiao Hua distanced himself from Kai Zhuoxia and spoke more carefully. Kai Zhuoxia seemed to be thinking about something, so she didn't notice. The two of them traveled like this for more than 10 days. On this day, a fiery red streak appeared in the distant horizon. Xiao Hua pointed and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Kai, is that Flame Forest Swamp?" Kai Zhuoxia raised her head and looked, somewhat at a loss. "Yes, it is. I came here with my family's elders a few years ago. When I saw it for the first time, I was just as surprised as fellow Taoist. But how did we arrive so quickly?" Kai Zhuoxia asked curiously. Quickly?" Xiao Hua smiled bitterly and said, "We've been flying for more than 10 days. According to fellow Taoist Kai, we should have arrived." "Oh." Kai Zhuoxia seemed to wake up from a dream. She smiled apologetically and said, "I was a bit strange during this time. I was always absent-minded. Fellow Taoist Xiao, please don't blame me." Fellow Taoist Cultivation seems to have increased again. "I'm afraid you're about to reach the middle stage of the 4th layer of qi refining." "Not at all." Xiao Hua was somewhat proud and repeatedly waved his hand. "I just entered the early stage of the 4th layer of qi refining. I'm still far from the middle stage." In fact, Xiao Hua was clear that after he obtained the cultivation method of spirit stones, the amount of spiritual energy he absorbed into his body every day was more than twice as much as before. In other words, his cultivation speed was much faster now. Not only did he catch up to the speed of ordinary cultivators, he even surpassed them by a lot. Although these 20 days were extremely short, it allowed his cultivation to take a small step forward. Soon after, Xiao Hua looked around and said with a smile, "We've been traveling for more than 10 days and haven't met any other cultivators. Presumably, even if they also come to Flame Forest Swamp, we won't have any disputes, right?" "Perhaps. Flame Forest Swamp is extremely large. I have a vague impression of the place fellow Taoist Xiao mentioned. It should be in the periphery of Flame Forest Swamp. Moreover, it can be considered concealed. That place shouldn't be the place Flying Phoenix Ridge's Pooh clan went. The other 3 fellow Taoists probably have their own matters to attend to. However, other than those cultivators, there are many other dangerous places in Flame Forest Swamp. It's better for us to be careful." "Yes, this poor Taoist knows," Xiao Hua replied with a smile. Just as he was about to continue speaking, suddenly, a loud rumbling sound came from the direction of the Flame Forest Swamp. The entire ground shook up and down. Although Xiao Hua and Kai Zhuoxia were in midair, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth that was rapidly surging towards the Flame Forest Swamp caused their figures to sway from side to side. Kai Zhuoxia's expression changed drastically as she shouted, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, let's quickly land on the ground." At this time, a clear voice sounded in Xiao Hua's heart. "Mother, where are you, mother?" Xiao Hua's heart felt as if it was being hammered. Previously, he had also heard these words, but he only thought that he had misheard. Now that he heard it again, and it was actually somewhat clear, how could he not be extremely astonished? Whoosh! The heaven and earth spiritual qi formed a hurricane that lifted Xiao Hua's body high up into the air. He almost lost his balance, and at the same time, the sound disappeared without a trace. Xiao Hua's figure swayed left and right along with the hurricane, but this couldn't compare to the shock in his heart. "Mother? Who is it? This voice, who is it?" A few ghost legends inexplicably rushed into Xiao Hua's heart. "Fellow Taoist Xiao. Fellow Taoist Xiao." Kai Zhuoxia's voice came from below. Sigh. Xiao Hua sighed deeply. His hand formed a seal, and his figure turned rapidly. Like a vertical awl, he rushed through the airflow and plunged into the lush mountain forest below him. In the mountain forest, Kai Zhuoxia's beautiful face turned pale. Seeing Xiao Hua descend, she welcomed him and said with concern, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, what are you thinking about? This kind of heavenly phenomenon is not something a human can resist. How can you be absent-minded at such a crucial moment?" Absent-minded? Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. How could he say that voice that came from his heart? After all, he couldn't explain it clearly. And the one who was truly absent-minded was probably Kai Zhuoxia herself. However, fellow Taoist Zhao's flying technique is indeed exceptional. Just by relying on a flying talisman, you can freely move unhindered in this kind of heavenly phenomenon. This control of magic power and the use of spells is truly not something I can reach, Kai Zhuoxia said with a bit of envy. Xiao Hua waved his hand, looked into the distance, and said with a smile, "No matter how powerful I am, I'm only at the 4th level of qi refining. It's impossible for me to be a match for a foundation establishment senior. In front of an old senior, I simply don't have the power to fight back." Kai Zhuoxia's eyes moved, but she looked into the distance and muttered, "This kind of heaven-collapsing and earth-rending earthquake is very rare. I don't know what happened in Flame Forest Marsh. Is there even a need to say it? Naturally, it's something that Flying Phoenix Ridge's Pooh clan and the 3 cultivators who teleported here with us want to do," Xiao Hua said resolutely. But soon after, he hesitated again. "That Pooh clan's clan master is a foundation establishment senior. Should we still go forward?" Kai Zhuoxia also hesitated for a moment. Soon after, she clenched her teeth and said, "Go. Of course we have to go. We're already so close. How can we not go? Besides, even the Pooh clan's clan master came. Maybe there's something good inside. If we run into it, we might even be able to fish up some benefits." "Let's go." Kai Zhuoxia waved her hand. Her figure flew up, and she flew towards that line of fiery red in the distance. Why did this girl change her personality? Xiao Hua was stunned at first. Previously, Kai Zhuoxia always thought about everything she encountered and had a lot of misgivings. This time, it was obvious that there was a lot of danger ahead. But why did she brace herself and charge forward? It seemed like she was even more of a rogue cultivator than a rogue cultivator like himself. Just as Xiao Hua and Kai Zhuoxia sped up their flight towards the Flame Forest Swamp, in the direction where the loud sound came from, there was a depression in the Flame Forest Swamp. In the depression, there were more than 10 cultivators wearing 2 different kinds of clothing. They held different kinds of talismans and magic tools in their hands. They were currently surrounding a 10-zhang-wide formation in the middle of the depression. Blood was seeping out of their 7 orifices. Their blood-stained eyes were wide open, and they were fiercely staring at each other. They were in a stalemate. Around the formation, there were more than 10 cultivators' corpses. They were bleeding from their 7 orifices and collapsed on the ground. These dozens of cultivators' clothing were also divided into 2 kinds, and their numbers were roughly equal. On both sides of the formation, there were 2 early-stage foundation establishment cultivators. They each held a magic tool in their hands, and they were coldly looking at each other. Of these 2 foundation establishment cultivators, one was Flying Phoenix Ridge's Pu Jianyuan, and the other was Ling Jingyi, who teleported here with Xue Xue. Xue Xue was bleeding from her 7 orifices. She had a dull expression as she sat next to Ling Jingyi. "Pu Jianyuan, you're despicable." Ling Jingyi's eyes flashed with a cold light, and he said coldly, "Our 2 clans made a vow to break this formation together. But why did you go back on your word when the formation was about to break? If you didn't change sides, how could this formation have backfired? How could more than half of our disciples be injured?" Ling Jingyi, don't talk to this old man about righteousness." Pu Jianyuan also sneered. "Didn't your Ling clan's disciples also have evil intentions? If they didn't use all their strength to mobilize the formation to defend against the enemy, how could they have fallen to such a state?" Ling Jingyi raised his head and laughed. "According to what you said, my Ling clan's disciples should have stood there obediently and been destroyed by your Flying Phoenix Ridge? That's really preposterous." Forget it. What's the point of arguing? Let's see who's the real deal." Pu Jianyuan waved his hand, and a palm of lightning struck towards Ling Jingyi. "Good." Ling Jingyi snorted and waved his hand, and a blue light spilled out from his hand. It was a net-like magic tool that flew out and blocked the palm of lightning. The palm of lightning crackled, but the lightning was all absorbed by the net-like magic tool, and not a single bit of it came out. Old thief Pooh, your cultivation is only a... Ling Jingyi roared, and the magic power in his hand surged. A bright light flew out and spun in the air, and smashed towards Pooh Jinyuan's head. It's just a replica of the immortal binding ring. What's there to be proud of? Pooh Jinyuan also threw out the flat Dharma treasure in his hand. A ray of light that looked like a white cloud appeared above Pooh Jinyuan, holding the immortal binding ring in the air. It floated up and down a few times, unable to fall down. How is it? This old man. Before Pooh Jinyuan could finish his sentence, a dazzling golden light shot up into the sky above the basin. In the blink of an eye, it flew in front of the two of them. From the golden light, a huge spider appeared. The spider stopped in the air, and from its abdomen, two thin golden threads suddenly shot out, flying towards the two magic tools that were fighting in the air. The golden threads were also strange. They flew to the two magic tools and quickly wrapped around them. At the same time, the two magic tools immediately lost contact with Ling Jingyi and Pooh Jinyuan. Golden cover spider. Ling Jingyi and Pooh Jinyuan were shocked. They couldn't care less about fighting. They flew away and formed seals in their hands, wanting to attack the golden spider. But just as they flew up, the gold-covered spider had already retracted its spider silk. It followed the golden brilliance and suddenly flew into the sky above the basin. Where do you think you're going? Ling Jingyi patted his hand and took out a flying sword from his storage bag. He channeled his magic power, and the flying sword pierced towards the golden cover spider like lightning. With a kachad sound, the flying sword pierced the back of the golden cover spider. There was a burst of sparks, but the golden cover spider didn't suffer any damage and continued to fly back. Which fellow cultivator is watching the battle from the side? Seeing that Ling Jingyi's flying sword was ineffective, Pooh Jinyuan knew that something was wrong. He looked at the equally shocked disciples around him, and he chased after the golden cover spider and flew towards the high mountain above the basin. Haha, I said that there must be something strange going on. The Pooh family of Flying Phoenix Ridge and the Ling family of Mist Mountain came one after another. There must be something strange going on. This old man guessed it right. A loud and clear voice came from the sky. -5, you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.